You've become a careless cleaner. There's dust in the corner. You're supposed to be a housewife, so you need to do better. If I see dust again, I'll sell your computer. As my work as a comic artist grew, my husband started to ignore me. When I had tight deadlines, he would bother me, get picky about chores, and sometimes even make me redo the cleaning. It feels like my husband wants me to be the perfect housewife, but being a comic artist has been my dream since I was a child. I don't want to give up on it. Also, I have a feeling my husband is hiding something from me. I don't think I can forgive him. I'm Emma, 31 years old. I'm a freelance comic artist. I create comics, and in between, I also take care of the house. My husband, Jack, is 35. We've been married for 6 years. When we got married, we agreed that I would be a full-time housewife. 2 years into our marriage, my parents passed away. I was their only child, so Jack and I moved into the house I inherited. I still didn't want to stop working on my comics, which I'd been doing since I was a student. I could have been a full-time housewife, but my dream is to support myself with my comics. Right now, I'm only doing lighthearted comics. Can I work from home? I asked Jack. He said, it's just a hobby, right? Fine, I guess it's okay. So I kept working on my comics even after we got married. 6 months ago, one of my comics got noticed by a magazine editor. They published it as a 2-page feature. After that, I started getting calls from other magazines and my schedule became packed with comic deadlines. But when I told Jack, he wasn't happy. You've been doing well lately, huh? You're just a stay-at-home wife. Your comics are for fun, right? And your pay is like a kid's allowance, isn't it? Why are you saying that, Jack? I know you don't read comics, but this has always been my dream. Yes, the job might not pay much yet, but I'm still getting paid. I'm a professional. You shouldn't talk down to me like that. When I defended myself, Jack got even more upset. How can you talk like that when I'm the one providing for us? If you have a problem, wait until you're earning more than me. I didn't know how to respond. I depended on him. My work didn't bring in much money, about $600 a month. Jack would only talk to me when I was busy with deadlines. You're being careless. There's dust in the corner. You're a housewife, so get it together. If I see dust again, I'll sell your computer. I knew he wasn't serious, but I was still scared. I ended up spending so much time cleaning that I missed my deadlines. Jack would get even more annoyed, so he started criticizing every little chore, which was frustrating. One night, Jack came home from work. He has a habit of eating dinner as soon as he gets home. That night, just like usual, he sat down, put some food in his mouth, and suddenly shouted from the kitchen. Hey, what is this? The radish isn't cooked properly. Are you serious? Is this what you give your husband after he comes home tired? I was still in a daze after meeting a deadline, but his yelling caught me off guard. I turned to Jack. Just then, Jack picked up his beer and spilled it all over me. My mind went blank. I never imagined someone would pour beer on me. It shocked me completely. Oh, I'm sorry. I must have spaced out while cooking. Everything else should be fine, so just leave out the radish. While cooking, I realized I'd forgotten to cook the radish, and in my rush, I just tossed it into the stew without boiling it. I made sure the potatoes were fine, but the radish completely slipped my mind. I don't usually make mistakes like this, and I felt really embarrassed. It seemed like Jack couldn't forgive me for the mistake either. It's awful that I have a wife who can't even do housework properly. I should never have married you. Jack got up from the table and headed for the bedroom. I quickly followed, but he went into the bedroom and packed a bag. Where are you going? I'm leaving until you apologize. What? I was so confused and didn't understand what he meant. Jack packed his bag and actually left the house. I ran after him, and when Jack reached the nearest station, he got into a cab and left. I called him several times, but he didn't answer. I even sent him an apology on WhatsApp, but he didn't even read it. I collapsed and started crying. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was Mr. Williams, Jack's boss. I used to work at the same company as Jack before we got married. Mr. Williams had been my boss too, and he had always supported my career when I first joined. Mr. Williams? I'm a section chief now, you know. It's been a while. Since your wedding, huh? Why are you crying? You smell like alcohol. Did you go drinking while wearing your apron? Oh, it's been a while. I'm so embarrassed to say this, but Jack and I had a fight. Oh, he can be a bit harsh sometimes, can't he? It's one thing if it's just work stuff, But when you're married and living together, that's when things can really get annoying. Mr. Williams smiled at me, and it reminded me of how many times this smile had helped me out when I made mistakes at work. We decided to go to a nearby restaurant to talk for a bit. So why were you crying? Are you the type to cry easily? Well, it's my fault. I messed up cooking today. I made stew, but only the radish wasn't cooked. That made Jack angry. Ah, I see. My wife is like that too. Sometimes things just happen. There's no need to get mad about it. It just drives us apart, you know. That's a good idea. So you didn't have a fight after going out for drinks? No, I was the one who ended up covered in alcohol because Jack spilled beer on me after he got mad about my cooking. I think it's dried now though. When I rushed to the station, I could still smell it on me. People told me I smelled like alcohol, but I couldn't really tell myself. He spilled beer on you just because of some cooking. There's something off with Jack, right? I always thought he was a bit of a jerk, but I can't believe he'd do that to his wife. That's unbelievable. Mr. Williams looked really upset, almost like he'd been the one spilled on. It made me feel a little better. So why did you go to the station? Did you come all the way here in your apron because of Jack? Yes, because Jack was acting weird. He called me a shagging wife and said he was leaving the house until I felt sorry for myself. I followed him to the station, but he got into a cab and left. I didn't know what to say. Mr. Williams, who had been angry earlier, suddenly looked serious. After a moment of silence, he spoke. I can't say anything yet, but I have a bad feeling about this. I'm going to check into Jack too. He might have left something at home, so you should look around. I nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting him. We called it a day, and Mr. Williams drove me home. As Mr. Williams suggested, I checked the shelves Jack often used and went through his clothes. Inside the pocket of his pants, I found a hotel loyalty card. It had been used recently, and the card showed it had been used around noon on Saturday, when Jack had told me he was working on his day off. I was sure Jack was cheating on me. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in a long time. Before we got married, we had one of those moments where we lost our phones. We had joked about how it would be helpful to use each other's phone GPS to find each other. Jack had set up an app to track our phones, and I completely forgot about it. I opened the app, entered the password, and we found Jack's phone in a surprising location, a famous tourist spot, known for being a popular date spot. It was hard to believe he'd go there alone. I decided that Jack was likely on a trip with his secret partner. The next day, I called Mr. Williams at the company. Mr. Williams, thanks for yesterday. No problem. Did something happen? Did Jack not show up to work today? There was a pause, and after a deep sigh, Mr. Williams replied, yes, he requested 4 days of paid leave starting today. I knew it, I said. I hate to say it, but he's probably. I know, but now I feel better. Thanks. After hanging up, I made a decision. I had been thinking about it for a while. If Jack was cheating, I was going to do something about it. I called someone and explained everything. As soon as I told him about Jack, he immediately took my side. I hung up feeling relieved, sure that things would work out. The next day, I went with some people to the place the GPS had pointed to. It was inside a resort hotel near a popular tourist spot. Right now, it seemed Jack was outside the hotel, as the GPS showed him at a nearby beach. When Jack saw my face, he went pale. With a smile on my face, I pointed my phone at him and snapped a series of photos. I wanted to get a shot of him and the young woman standing next to him. She looked to be in her early 20s. By the way, 30 minutes earlier, Jack had been in a bikini with that girl. I even managed to take pictures of him rubbing sunscreen on her. I let them continue until I had enough evidence that Jack was cheating on me. The two of them were so carefree, maybe even out of their minds, because they were kissing in public. By that point, I wasn't shocked at all. It was like I'd already had enough of the situation. In fact, I was kind of grateful to them for giving me solid proof. Jack was clearly surprised, and his pale face wasn't just from seeing me. Behind me were my in-laws, both of them glaring at Jack. What's going on here, Jack? I walked up to him with a smile, and either he panicked or he tripped in the sand and fell on his backside. My mother-in-law sighed when she saw this. Jack, you're pathetic. Who is this girl? What are you doing, leaving your wife alone? Jack quickly tried to defend himself. She doesn't do any housework. He was flustered, pointing a finger at me as he accused me. Oh really? That's not true. Even if she didn't clean sometimes, she still did laundry, cooking, and dishes every day. Mom helps clean sometimes too. I don't like doing laundry either, and sometimes I leave it to Dad. That's because you work part-time, right? She doesn't. She's just a housewife who draws and messes around. So why can't she at least handle the housework? Jack's words made my father-in-law furious. You don't get it at all. Even people around us were starting to stare. Some were even recording with their phones. I suggested, why don't we go somewhere more private to discuss this? Everyone agreed, so my in-laws and I went to a nearby restaurant first. Jack and his girlfriend changed out of their swimsuits into regular clothes, and then the five of us sat down to talk. We started by hearing Jack's side of the story. I wanted Emma to be a full-time housewife, but she started this silly hobby of drawing comics and ignored her housework. I told her over and over, but she just wouldn't listen to me. So it's only natural that I start looking for someone else, right? Mitch, the girl Jack had been seeing, spoke up, countering him. What? Isn't that different from what you told me? You had a stalker at your house, and you were troubled, so you asked me to help you forget about it for a while. When I suggested you call the police, you said it was only a matter of time before they caught him. If you were married, you shouldn't have dated me in the first place. Mitch started crying after saying that. Apparently, she was still in college and met Jack on a dating app. She told me she was attracted to older men, but now regretted getting involved with him. I'm sorry, I'll never contact Jack again. I've learned my lesson, and I won't let myself be fooled next time, she said, bowing deeply to me and my parents. She showed us her phone where she deleted Jack's number, then left money on the table before walking away. I glared at Jack, who looked panicked by Mitch's sudden exit. It makes sense that I wouldn't do everything you ask, right? I have feelings and a life too. I'm not your robot to control. It's disgusting that you cheated on me just because things didn't go your way. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but my father stepped in. You don't seem to get it, do you? I'm the one who worked to support Emma, so she should respect me, right? Dad calmly addressed Jack, whose anger was visibly rising. You're acting like a child. You're just throwing a tantrum because things aren't going your way. You need to respect Emma's choices. There's nothing else to say. Dad stood up and paid the bill, leaving the restaurant with my parents. Jack and I were left alone. I had nothing left to say. Jack, I got a series published in a comic magazine. Jack stared at me with a worried expression. Congratulations. Music. I can't be the housewife you want anymore. I'm sorry. I'm tired of being with you. I want a divorce. I'm sorry. You can keep drawing comics and I'll help with the housework. I won't complain anymore. Jack pleaded, tears in his eyes, but I couldn't look at him anymore. I didn't want to see this pathetic man who had once been my husband. I'm sorry, but it's not about that anymore. You looked down on me, didn't you? I thought we were equals, but you didn't see it that way. You thought you were in a better position just because you worked to support me. No, you were right. I've changed my mind. I promise I won't make things hard for you anymore. Please don't leave me. I've decided to sell the house we lived in. I have a relative who runs a real estate agency and he agreed to buy it right away. There are still some formalities to complete, but it'll be sold soon. I know I'll get less for it than if I used an agent, but it's my house and I can do what I want with it. I want to cut ties with you as soon as possible. I'm leaving tomorrow and I want you to leave that house as soon as you can. With that, I stood up and walked toward the exit. It was the opposite of the day Jack left the house. Now it was him chasing after me desperately, as if trying to stop me. But when I got into the car, my parents had already arrived. My dad, sitting in the driver's seat, started the car as soon as I slammed the door shut. Jack ran after the car, crying, but I couldn't see him anymore. It seems like he didn't believe anything I said, because when he came back from his trip, he saw that all my things were gone. He called me, crying. I answered the phone as a final act of mercy. Why did you sell the house? It's ours, right? Funny thing to say, isn't it? I inherited this house from my parents. Even then, I have the right to it. You have no claim to my inheritance. If you understand that, then get out of my house and ask for an amicable divorce. You'll hear from my lawyer, so don't run away. I said everything I needed to say and hung up the phone. After that, Jack was scolded by Mr. Smith for using his paid time off to go on a trip with his mistress. I heard that he didn't technically need a reason for taking time off, but the fact that he cheated on me and went golfing was something his boss severely questioned. Jack was now facing cold stares from his colleagues at work and living an uncomfortable life. My parents also gave up on him. Jack tried to go back to his parents' house, but they turned him away. He lost money due to alimony payments, sank into debt, and was living alone in a cheap apartment, unable to manage any housework. Later, Mr. Smith told me about it, but I didn't feel anything. As for me, I moved into a beautiful one-room apartment and am busy working on a plot for my comic series. I'm researching various omnibus works as references. The next story I'm planning to draw is about a husband's infidelity, and I'm thinking of using Jack as inspiration.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisa. I'm 29 years old and currently living in Atlanta, Georgia, though I'm planning to move soon. Recently, I ended a difficult year-and-a-half-long marriage. It was a challenging time, but with my father's support and the intervention of the police, I managed to get through it. Looking back, I realize I should have been more cautious before accepting the proposal. I've always been shy and reserved, finding comfort in solitude. Most of my time is spent on my computer, immersed in the digital world. Occasionally, I'll visit a pub for a drink, but I'm uneasy around strangers and hesitant to form new friendships out of concern for my safety. My life changed significantly when I was 7. My mother passed away from an untreated heart condition, and from that moment on, my father, a mariner since his mid-20s, raised me. His job kept him away for long stretches, but he always stayed in touch through calls and letters. When my mother died, he returned home to comfort me. I still remember clinging to him at her funeral as he reassured me, "It's okay now, my little girl, Daddy's here." That night, I saw him cry on the couch, whispering to himself before burying his face in a cushion. It was only the second time I'd seen him cry. The first was when I was injured as a child. Feeling responsible for our situation, he took 3 months off from sailing to care for me. Before his next voyage, he left me in my grandmother's care, encouraging me to help her and promising to return soon. Those early years of loss and resilience shaped me. I spent most of my time indoors, helping my grandmother and finding solace in books and, later, the internet. By the time I started college, my father sent me back to our old house. Adjusting was hard. I disliked campus life and struggled to connect with others in person, but online, I found confidence. The internet became my refuge, a place where I could express myself freely. I made friends from around the world, each with unique stories that showed me how interconnected we all are. It was here I met Steven, a content creator. We started chatting and eventually progressed to video calls. To keep my anonymity, I wore a Batman mask, and he covered his face with a scarf and beanie. "Hi Lisa, it's great to finally see you," Steven greeted during one of our calls. "Hello Steven, nice to meet you, virtually," I replied. "How are you feeling today? Have you chatted with many people?" he asked. "I'm okay, just a bit nervous," I admitted. "That's normal, don't worry, I'm just as awkward as you," he reassured me with a smile. As we talked, we discovered shared interests and exchanged stories. The connection felt natural, and I began to feel at ease. "Thanks for making this so effortless," I said. "The feeling's mutual. Lisa, you're great to talk to. Let's chat again sometime. I'm usually online playing Mario," he joked. Our conversations deepened over time, and though we only knew each other online, we formed a meaningful bond. Meanwhile, my father remained cautious about my online activities. Over dinner recently, he asked about my plans. "So, how are your studies, Dove?" he asked. "I've graduated, Dad," I replied, a hint of sharpness in my voice. "You wouldn't know, you weren't there." He sighed, looking regretful. "Oh, Lisa, I'm sorry, I know I missed a lot. I even emailed you saying I'd be there for your birthday." "Tomorrow's my pumpkin's birthday," he exclaimed, trying to lighten the mood. "Stop calling me names, Dad, I'm not a kid anymore. To me, you'll always be my little dove. But seriously, what are your plans? Are you thinking of working?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "What do you mean you're not sure? What are your friends up to these days?" His questions made me reflect on where my life is heading. While I'm uncertain about the future, I know that both the digital and real-world experiences have shaped me. For now, I'll take one step at a time, guided by the lessons I've learned along the way. "I don't have any friends, Dad," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. My dad sighed deeply. "Lisa, I didn't send you to live with your mom's family just so you could stay cooped up inside all day. There's a whole world out there. So many people you'll never meet if you don't step outside. That's the problem, I said, exasperated. I don't know how to. This exchange exposed the gulf between us, his world of tangible connections and mine, rooted in the digital realm. Still, I relented. I'll try, okay? I do have friends, but they're all online. Online friends? Dad shook his head, disappointment creeping into his voice. That's not how real friendships work, Lisa. I sighed, the weight of his disapproval pressing down on me. Fine, how about this, we go out today, just you and me, shopping or something? That sounds like a start, he said, his tone softening. You've got to push yourself, Lisa. This isn't living. I know it's been hard since Janice. Why are you bringing Mom into this? I snapped, anger bubbling to the surface. What are you trying to say? I'm saying we've both been stuck in the past, he said gently, though his words stung. We loved her, but we have to find a way forward, Lisa. His well-meaning words ignited something in me. I slammed my hands on the table, the clatter echoing in the room. You don't understand me, I spat, standing abruptly. Lisa, please, I'm trying to help you, Dad pleaded, his voice tinged with frustration and hurt. You don't know everything about me, so stop pretending you do, I shouted before storming off, my emotions in turmoil. I retreated to my sanctuary, my room, my computer, and the reassuring presence of Stephen on the other end of the screen. Stephen, you won't believe the argument I just had with my dad, I vented. Tell me what happened, he replied, his voice calm and understanding. I poured out my frustrations, the sense of being misunderstood, my dad's inability to grasp why I found solace online. Stephen listened patiently, never judging. Hey, he said after a moment, would you want to meet up sometime? We're both introverts, so it doesn't have to be anything big, just a quiet place where we can talk. His suggestion startled me. I'm not sure, it feels so sudden, I'd need time to think about it, I said, my voice hesitant. Take all the time you need, Stephen replied warmly. Whenever you're ready, you know where to find me. Here's my address. Why are you so kind to me? We're just strangers, I asked, confused by his unwavering support. Because I like you, Lisa, he admitted simply. You, like me? My voice wavered with disbelief. Yeah, he said softly, I'd like to get to know you better, and if you ever feel the same, I'm here. Meeting Stephen felt like a leap into the unknown, but one I knew I needed to take. Standing outside his house for the first time, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. After a month of chatting online, I was about to step beyond the screen into a new chapter of my life. I was about to meet Stephen in person for the first time. Surprisingly, he lived just a 15-minute drive away. Taking a deep breath to calm my nerves, I knocked on the weathered wooden door. It creaked open, revealing Stephen's warm smile, which immediately put me at ease. Welcome to my humble abode. Your presence graces my domain, fair master, he joked, adding a playful touch of gamer lingo. I laughed softly. Some of that gaming talk might go over my head, but thank you. This place is cozy. Do you live here alone? I asked, glancing around at the neatly arranged space. Nope, fair princess, he replied with a grin. I live with my mom. She has the ground floor, and I've got the top floor all to myself. Come on, I'll give you the grand tour. Stephen's home wasn't extravagant, but it was charming and full of personality. Shelves lined with well-thumbed classics, a stack of board games, and a perfectly arranged computer setup painted a picture of someone genuine and thoughtful. His quirks, evident in every corner, made the space feel uniquely his. We spent the afternoon talking and laughing, discovering shared interests that deepened our connection beyond the digital realm. Meeting in person added a layer of closeness I hadn't anticipated. He was as kind and witty as he'd been online, and his easy humor made me feel at ease. As the sun began to set, Stephen suggested a walk in the nearby park. The cool breeze accompanied our conversation, which flowed seamlessly, dissolving any lingering nervousness. Wait, you didn't celebrate your birthday? He asked, surprised, during a lull in our talk. No, I admitted quietly, I didn't feel like it, especially after the argument with my dad. Stephen gave me a sympathetic look. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sure he'll come around, he's your dad, after all. At first, his words seemed kind, soothing even, but over time, I realized there was an edge to his concern. What began as a blossoming relationship turned into something suffocating. As we started dating, Stephen's affection grew possessive. He wanted me constantly available, either talking to him on the phone or online. If I chatted with anyone else, he'd get angry, cloaking his jealousy with statements like, "I just want to protect you." I believed him. Why did I believe him? His mother's disapproval only made things worse. Though she'd never met me, she dismissed me outright. The strain of knowing she didn't approve was compounded by Stephen's constant defense of her. "Not every parent is perfect. Just look at your dad," he'd say. "At least my mom cares about me." "That hurts, Stephen," I'd reply, trying to make him see the damage his words caused. "But you know I'm the one who loves you, right? Your dad doesn't love you like I do. Stop complaining about your life and try to compromise," he'd add, his tone more commanding than caring. When he suggested a secret wedding, I was too worn down to resist. Stephen convinced me that my dad wouldn't approve and didn't truly care about me. Blinded by what I thought was love, I went along with it, believing his assurances over my own instincts. Looking back, I wonder how I let it get so far. Each step I took closer to Stephen, I seemed to lose more of myself. I reluctantly agreed to marry him in a quiet, somber ceremony. Deep down, I knew it was a risk, but I felt trapped by my circumstances. You might think I was weak, but the weight of my upbringing and insecurities had shaped me, leaving me unsure of how to stand up for myself. I often blamed my inability to fight back on my own failings. In the months that followed, I began to see a side of his mother I hadn't anticipated, a side filled with cruelty and malice. Her every action seemed designed to make me miserable. It started with subtle, cutting remarks and escalated into relentless emotional torment. "Is this supposed to be food? My son can't eat this mess. Make it again, you fool," she'd sneer. "Why is this place so filthy? Are you blind?" Her harsh words chipped away at my self-esteem until I felt utterly worthless. Stephen, meanwhile, was a passive observer, locked away in his room with his video games and music. His detachment left me isolated, bearing the brunt of his mother's venom alone. I missed my dad terribly and regretted every fight we'd ever had. It was my anger that had driven him away, and now I had no one to turn to. One day, feeling feverish, I lay down on the couch, hoping for a brief reprieve. Just as I was beginning to drift off, a sudden splash of icy water shocked me awake. Margaret stood over me, her face twisted with disdain. "What the hell are you doing on our couch? Did you get the groceries like I told you?" she barked. Too weak to argue, I didn't reply. "I see, you expect me to do all the work while you laze around? You devil," she spat, slapping me hard across the face before calling for Stephen. That was my breaking point. "I'm done," I shouted. "I won't be your punching bag anymore. Find someone else to torment because I'm leaving." But as I turned to go, something heavy struck the back of my head, and the world went dark. When I came to, I found myself in a dimly lit room. My head throbbed as I struggled to sit up. Where was I? The sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill down my spine. Crawling toward the noise, I reached a metal door with a small window. It creaked open, and there was Stephen, grinning cruelly. "Is my wife afraid of the dark?" he mocked. "Stephen, please let me out. This isn't funny," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Shut up. This is what you get for disrespecting my mother. Maybe you'll learn to behave down here," he sneered. Desperation consumed me as he slammed the window shut, plunging me into darkness. Alone in the cold, I felt fear give way to anger. How had my life come to this? I reached into my pocket and felt the shattered remains of my phone. To my astonishment, the screen still flickered faintly. Trembling, I dialed the only person who might still care, my father. 3 agonizing days later, hope arrived in the form of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced as I heard firm footsteps approach the house. The door burst open, and there he was, my father. His presence was a beacon of strength and relief. He didn't come alone. The police followed him, storming into the house to confront Stephen and Margaret. Their protests were feeble, their lies transparent. "What have you done to my daughter, you monsters?" my father bellowed. "I was going to let her go, I swear," Stephen stammered, but his words fell on deaf ears. My father turned to him, his voice filled with disgust. "You're nothing but a coward. You will pay for what you've done." As I stepped out of that dark basement and into the sunlight, I felt a surge of determination. This ordeal had tested me, but it also revealed my strength and the power of unwavering love. I decided to leave Georgia and start anew in California with my dad. I vowed never to let anyone silence me again and to be more cautious in trusting others. The scars of this experience would remain, but they would serve as a reminder of my resilience and the promise of a brighter future ahead.
I married Raymond because he was the son of my former boss, and 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, our life together has generally been happy. Raymond is dedicated to his work and often travels, which can leave me feeling lonely, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me when he's home. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me the time to pursue my own interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriended our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Every winter, I'd gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. At first, my attempts were a bit amateurish, but his appreciative comments over the years encouraged me, and I grew to love crafting even more. I'd often dream of the day when we can sew together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he smiled warmly, entertaining the idea of joining me in the future. To outsiders, our life may seem privileged, thanks to Raymond's substantial income. But I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, and making the most of our time together on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and hopefully children. However, 3 years ago, everything changed. One evening, while waiting for Raymond to return home from work, I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed back and took me to the hospital where I lay recovering, vulnerable. It was then, to my shock, that Raymond confessed with a smile, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him discarded and devalued, I was struck with the need to confront him. I wanted him to realize how wrong he was if he thought he could belittle my worth. Despite the hurt, the thought of him eventually recognizing my value brought a small smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh wake-up call about the marriage I had once believed was built on love. When I woke up in the hospital, I overheard snippets of Raymond's conversation with the doctors. It became clear that my condition was serious, likely a lifelong issue, though not immediately life-threatening. Still, the risk of recurrence meant I would need to stay in the hospital for some time. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for a while, but don't worry. I'll make time to visit, and we'll get through this together." His presence eased my anxiety, and for a moment I felt that everything might be okay with him by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited almost every day. He'd ask about my day, and noticing the monotony of hospital life, even brought my favorite sewing tools so we could pass the time together. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became one of the highlights of my days. It helped me momentarily forget the dreariness of the hospital and feel connected to him. This routine continued for about a year, and I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition. But after that, his visits grew less frequent. At first, I thought it was just work piling up, so I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making when he visited next. The doctors told me I'd likely be discharged by the end of the year, and I poured all my energy into crafting the gloves, hoping they would bridge the gap created by our time apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had knitted for him the previous year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality of the situation sank in. The scarf was as new as the day I had given it to him, and his cold words marked the painful end of a marriage I had once believed was supportive. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" he remarked casually. "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was like a sharp blade cutting through everything I had cherished. "I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond said bluntly, pushing the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, the weight of his words sinking in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had suspected this might happen, especially after his visits became less frequent, but I had told myself it was just the stress of work, trying to dismiss my fears. The caring Raymond I had known would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask calmly, "Why do you want a divorce?" It wasn't desperation to hold on to him that prompted the question, but a resigned acceptance. If the gentle Raymond I loved thought divorce was necessary, maybe he was right. Still, part of me was confused. He had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles." I was exhausted, tired of the scarves and gloves I gave him every year. I only married you because you're the boss's daughter, he sneered, his words cutting deep. How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else? He laughed, and the sound was mocking, dismissing my affectionate gestures as trivial, and my illness as nothing more than an inconvenience. As his words sunk in, I noticed the high-end scarf he was wearing, one I didn't recognize, certainly not one I had made. It was sleek, expensive, far beyond anything I had ever crafted for him. The realization hit me hard. He had never appreciated any of the scarves or gloves I had poured my love into. In fact, he might have found them irritating from the start. Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed these days? He said, his voice dripping with disdain. Receiving these things is a nuisance now. I felt a wave of sadness mixed with an odd sense of relief. The sadness came from realizing the man I had loved had changed so drastically. The relief, though, was that now I knew the truth. At least the clarity was painful but necessary. Looking at the divorce papers in front of me, I was struck by the contrast. My hospitalization had been a turning point in our relationship, one I hadn't understood until now. After my father retired, Raymond no longer needed to maintain appearances with me. All those visits he made between work commitments. I now saw them for what they were, part of a carefully crafted act to maintain his image. His workplace must have viewed him as a devoted husband, balancing his career and his wife's illness with grace. The sympathy and praise he received from coworkers made it easier for him at work, and he had used my condition to his advantage. When I finally confronted him about it, he admitted without remorse. If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, I just mentioned my sick wife. It made things easier. Honestly, I even got a promotion thanks to you. I have to thank your illness for that. The cold grin on his face made my heart sink. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was nowhere to be found. Our conversation ended with me handing him the signed divorce papers. He barely looked at them before saying, "Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again. Take care." He left without a second thought, showing no emotion. The divorce itself was a quiet affair, but in the silence that followed, I cried. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to live with my parents. My father was furious when he heard the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he muttered in disbelief. But by then, I had found a sense of detachment and calm. I reassured him, telling him I just wanted to move forward. After sorting through my things at the house I had shared with Raymond, my parents supported me, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being, but I wanted one last visit to the house. I needed to collect the rest of my things and close that chapter of my life once and for all. However, when I arrived, I was met with an unsettling surprise. The front door lock was broken. My parents and I rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. I asked who he was, and he informed me that he had purchased the house months ago and was now living there with his family. My parents were furious, but chose not to escalate things. Instead, I walked away quietly, my mind racing with questions. I called Raymond, desperate for answers. He answered casually, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I'm keeping the money as compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaints, right?" His indifferent tone left me stunned, a cold sense of disbelief washing over me. I wished he had told me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold quite a while ago, probably about a year, when my husband's visits had stopped. Although our divorce had been finalized with the signed papers, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning to meet the following week. Yet my husband had already taken matters into his own hands. His lack of awareness bothered me more than I expected. Over the phone, I said, "You don't understand anything, do you?" Confused, he asked, "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up, leaving him with more questions than answers. I turned to my parents, who were clearly worried, and asked my father for a favor. Despite the short notice, he quickly prepared the necessary documents for our upcoming meeting. "I've got it already," he said with determination. "There's not much time, but we'll manage." His resolve was partly fueled by guilt. He had introduced me to my husband, and his anger toward him for what had transpired. We sat together at my family's home, my parents and I positioned in a line, facing my husband, who sat alone on the other side. Despite the tension, he appeared unconcerned, even smirking slightly as the conversation unfolded. He claimed, "I'm the victim here. but I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His words were laced with arrogance, as though he were being generous. But his smugness was clear. My father's face reddened with anger, and I placed a hand on him, urging him to stay calm. We had the upper hand in this situation, and I knew it. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. "The land on which the house stands is owned by me," my father said firmly. I turned to my husband. "The house was in your name," I acknowledged, "but the land belongs to my father." The revelation hit him hard. Though he tried to mask his surprise with a dismissive tone, his eyes betrayed him. "So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. You think you can retaliate with that?" I remained calm. "Yes, the house was in your name, and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it. But let me explain the broader implications." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle in. "You're right, there was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family who bought it. They own the house, but not the land. If my father decides to, he could demand rent from them, which would cause serious issues." I allowed that to sink in for a moment before continuing. "Of course, neither my father nor I intend to demand rent or evict them. We're not here to cause trouble. However, we can't just give up the rights to the land either. What we propose is selling the land directly to the family, ensuring they have full ownership. That way, they won't face any future legal disputes, and neither will you." The new owners, understandably, were upset when they learned of the situation. They realized that any complications stemming from this oversight would fall on the seller, my husband. They were ready to take legal action if necessary, which visibly unsettled him. I watched as his face turned pale, the realization of the mess he had created settling in. I could see that Raymond finally understood the severity of his mistake. His voice trembled as he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled faintly, keeping my composure. "The best course of action would be for the family to purchase the land from us. That way, they can fully own both the house and the land, resolving any legal ambiguities." I continued, "Of course, they weren't aware they needed to buy the land when they bought the house, and they will likely seek compensation for this unexpected expense. Given the prime location of the land, it could cost more than the house itself." This placed Raymond in a difficult position, but it was the consequence of his own decisions. By selling the house without considering the land ownership, he had created a complex issue, not only for himself but also for the unsuspecting family who had purchased the house. Now, he faced the potential financial fallout from his actions, which could include compensating the new owners for the cost of the land to fix the situation. Raymond's options were limited and financially perilous. If he gave up all his assets, he'd be left with nothing. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return the property to his possession, but given the significant costs, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd make any profit. But beyond the financial mess, there was the issue of emotional damage. I looked at him steadily and said, "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I plan to seek compensation for that. Keep that in mind." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career. Now that I could see his manipulations clearly, I was disgusted by what I had once mistaken for love. I intended to file for damages over the emotional toll his actions had taken, even though proving emotional distress in court could be challenging. Raising the issue, however, was important, especially given his current predicament. As Raymond processed this, my father added fuel to the fire. Despite being retired and no longer working at the company, he had maintained strong connections. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he said with a note of satisfaction. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words drove home the fact that Raymond's reputation at work was deteriorating. His unethical behavior was no longer a secret. As we sat across from him, preparing to discuss the terms of property division and compensation, my demeanor was calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I stated, clasping my hands and offering a smile. It was a smile very different from those I had given him during our marriage. This one came from someone who had reclaimed their power. Raymond, visibly shaken by the weight of his financial and social collapse, could only manage a forced laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to this fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting wasn't just about dividing property, it was a moment of realization for Raymond, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. It marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With every decision made, I felt a sense of closure, of empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We agreed that Raymond would buy the land where our house was located, ensuring the family who had purchased our home could live there without further legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully, they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to resolve the matter. In the end, everyone found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The consequences of his actions began to unfold quickly. The rumors my father had unintentionally set in motion took their toll. His colleagues' perceptions of him shifted dramatically, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed due to concerns over his integrity. These rumors continued to erode his professional standing, ultimately leading to his resignation. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it was a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are fragile and can easily crumble. As for me, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a thriving business, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided a modest income. Though I had once dreamed of teaching my children to sew, life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter of my life wasn't just about making ends meet. It was about finding contentment and building a sense of community by sharing what I loved. It confirmed that happiness often comes from the most unexpected places. I stared at the contract lying on our dining room table, my coffee growing cold beside it. James was still talking, gesturing excitedly about the beach house he'd already picked out in Malibu. But all I could focus on was his signature at the bottom of the page, right next to where he'd forged mine. "This is going to change everything, Olivia," he said, reaching for my hand. "No more 18-hour workdays, no more stress about funding rounds. We're set for life. My name is Olivia Chen, and at 36, I thought I knew my husband. We'd built quantum tech together from nothing, working out of our garage for 2 years before landing our first major client. Or at least, that's what James had always claimed. The truth was more complicated. When did you negotiate this deal?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. My father had taught me that, always get all the facts before showing your hand. "Last month, while you were in Seattle." James's smile faltered slightly. "I know I should have told you, but with everything going on with your dad, I didn't want to add to your stress." My father had been dying of pancreatic cancer. I'd spent his last weeks by his side, holding his hand as he slipped away. Meanwhile, my husband had been secretly selling our company to our biggest competitor. $5 million seems low," I said, taking a sip of my now cold coffee, considering our latest valuation was $12 million. James waved dismissively. "That valuation was optimistic. Besides, this is cash in hand, not theoretical value. And Global Tech is throwing in stock options too." I nodded slowly, thinking about the real documents locked in my home office safe. The ones that show I actually owned 75% of Quantum Tech, not the 30% James believed. The ownership structure had been my father's idea, his last gift to me, along with a warning I hadn't understood until now. "Trust is good," he'd said, "but controlled is better." "Have you told the team yet?" I asked, watching James's face carefully. "Not yet. I thought we could announce it together at Monday's all-hands meeting." He grinned, clearly pleased with himself. "Everyone's going to be thrilled. The severance packages are really generous." My stomach clenched. Severance packages? Well, yeah. He looked at me like I was being naive. Global Tech has their own development team. They're buying our technology, not our people. 47 people. That's how many employees had trusted us with their careers, had poured their hearts into building quantum tech. James was ready to throw them away without a second thought. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. "I'm going for a walk." "Don't be long," he called after me. "We have dinner reservations at 7 to celebrate." Once outside, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who'd known about my father's suspicions. My best friend and Quantum Tech's lead counsel, Maya Rodriguez. "He did it," I said as soon as she answered. "He tried to sell the company." Maya's sharp intake of breath crackled through the speaker. "Without board approval? Without your signature?" He forged my signature on the contract. I'm looking at it right now. I sent her a photo of the document. Dad was right about everything. The offshore accounts too. I'm still gathering evidence, but probably. I discovered suspicious transfers to a Cayman Islands account 2 weeks ago. Money moving out of the company in small increments that added up to over $2 million. Okay, Maya said, her lawyer voice kicking in. Don't let him know you suspect anything. I'll call Judge Martinez and get an emergency injunction to block the sale. Then we need tow. She stopped suddenly, and I heard papers shuffling. Olivia, when did he say he negotiated this deal? Last month while I was in Seattle with Dad. Why? Because I'm looking at his travel records right now. He wasn't meeting with Global Tech last month. He was in Cancun. My hand tightened around the phone. Cancun. With someone named Rebecca Palmer. Multiple hotel charges, dinner reservations for 2. Olivia, I'm so sorry. The pieces clicked into place. The late nights at the office, the mysterious business trips, the way he'd been pushing for this sale. This wasn't just about money. James was planning his exit, not just from the company, but from our marriage. Get me everything you can on Rebecca Palmer, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. And Maya? Thank you for having my back through all of this. Always, she replied firmly. No one steals my best friend's company and gets away with it. I ended the call and looked back at our house, the home we bought with my father's investment money, though James had always claimed it was from his savings. How many other lies had I believed? My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, 7 p.m., celebration dinner at Luciano's. I smiled grimly. Oh, we'd celebrate all right, just not the way James was expecting. Back inside, I found him in our bedroom, humming as he changed for dinner. Feel better? He asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. Much, I said, watching his reflection. Actually, I had an idea. Why don't we announce the sale tonight? I could invite Maya and the other board members to join us at Luciano's. Make it a real celebration. James turned, his expression flickering briefly before settling into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The board? Honey, we don't need to involve them yet. This should be our moment. You're right, I conceded, picking up my phone. Though I should at least invite Maya. She's put so much work into the company. No, he said sharply, then caught himself. I mean, let's keep it just us tonight. We can tell everyone else tomorrow. I nodded, pretending not to notice how his hands shook slightly as he finished with his tie. Whatever you think is best. He had no idea that Maya was already setting things in motion, that by morning his carefully constructed plan would start unraveling thread by thread. Ready to go, he asked, holding out his hand. I took it, feeling the wedding ring that had once meant everything to me. Ready. Luciano's was exactly as pretentious as I remembered, all crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths. James ordered an expensive bottle of champagne, beaming at me across the table like he'd just given me the world instead of trying to steal it. To our future, he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, watching the bubbles rise. To getting what we deserve. My phone buzzed silently in my lap. A message from Maya. Emergency injunction granted. Sheriff will serve papers to Global Tech tonight. Also, you need to see what I found about Rebecca Palmer. Everything okay? James asked, noticing my expression. Perfect, I smiled, slipping the phone back into my purse. Just a work email. Soon you won't have to worry about those anymore, he said, reaching for my hand. We can travel, maybe buy a vacation home. I was thinking Cancun would be nice. I nearly choked on my champagne. Cancun? That's specific. I heard it's beautiful this time of year, he said smoothly, but I caught the slight tension in his jaw. You know what else is beautiful? I asked, keeping my tone light. The view from our company's new satellite office, the one you approved last week without consulting me. He froze momentarily. Oh, that? Just some preliminary paperwork. Nothing's final. Really? Because Maya showed me the lease agreement this morning. 3 years, $2 million. That's a big commitment for a company you're selling. James's smile faltered. I can explain. Let me guess. I cut in. It's not what it looks like. Before he could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and paled slightly. I need to take this, he said, standing abruptly. Business call. I watched him hurry toward the restaurant's entrance, then pulled out my own phone and opened the file Maya had just sent. There it was, proof that the satellite office wasn't for quantum tech at all. James had leased it under a new company name, Palmer Technologies, named after Rebecca Palmer, the woman he'd been meeting in Cancun. A few minutes later, James returned to the table, his face ashen. "We need to go. Now. Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "What about dessert?" "Something's come up at the office," he said, already signaling for the check. "A problem with the servers." I knew exactly what had come up. Global Tech's lawyers would have just received the injunction blocking the sale. James's perfectly planned exit strategy was beginning to crumble. The drive home was tense, with James making frantic phone calls while I pretended to check my email. In reality, I was watching a series of text updates from Maya. Global Tech CEO is furious. James' offshore accounts frozen. Rebecca Palmer's real identity confirmed. She's not just his mistress. That last message made me sit up straighter. Not just his mistress. I typed back. Maya's response came quickly. She's Global Tech's VP of Acquisitions. This wasn't just an affair, it was corporate espionage. The pieces were falling into place. James hadn't just been planning to leave me. He'd been working with our competitor to steal our company's technology. The sale was just a cover for transferring our intellectual property to Global Tech. As we pulled into our driveway, James was still on the phone, his voice rising in panic. "What do you mean they got an injunction? Who could have?" "No, that's impossible. I have all the necessary signatures." I got out of the car and headed inside, leaving him to his crisis. In our home office, I opened the safe and pulled out the real company documents, the ones showing my majority ownership, the board resolutions James had never bothered to read carefully, and most importantly, the evidence of his fraud that I'd been gathering for months. "What did you do?" I turned to find James standing in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. "What did I do?" I repeated calmly. "I protected my company, the company my father helped build that you tried to steal." "Your company?" he scoffed. "I built quantum tech from nothing. You were just the money." "Is that what you told Rebecca?" I asked, watching his face pale. "When you were meeting her in Cancun, planning how to sell our technology to Global Tech?" He took a step forward, but I held up my hand. "Before you say anything else," I continued, "you should know that Maya has copies of everything. The forged documents, the offshore accounts, your meetings with Global Tech. Corporate espionage is a serious crime, James." "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice shook slightly. I opened my laptop and turned it toward him, showing the surveillance photos of him and Rebecca in Cancun, the bank transfers, the secret communications with Global Tech. "Did you really think my father would leave me unprotected?" I asked quietly. "He knew what you were, even before I did. That's why he made sure I had controlling interest in the company." James lunged for the laptop, but I was faster, stepping back as Maya and 2 police officers appeared in the doorway behind him. "James Thompson," one of the officers said, "you're under arrest for fraud and attempted corporate espionage." As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept looking back at me, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You're nothing without me." I watched from the window as the police car drove away, feeling strangely empty. The man I'd loved, the life I thought we built together. It had all been a carefully constructed lie. Maya touched my shoulder gently. "You okay?" I nodded, picking up the family photo from my desk, the last one taken before my father got sick. "Dad tried to warn me about James. I should have listened sooner." "You listened when it mattered," she said firmly. "Now, want to hear what else I found about Rebecca Palmer and Global Tech? Because this goes deeper than we thought." The next morning, Quantum Tech's offices were buzzing with nervous energy. I called an emergency all-hands meeting, and now faced 47 anxious faces as I stood at the front of our main conference room. "By now, you've probably heard rumors," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Yes, James has been arrested. Yes, there was an attempted sale to Global Tech. But no, none of you are losing your jobs." The relief in the room was palpable, but I wasn't finished. "What you don't know is that for the past 6 months, James has been working with Global Tech to steal our technology. He tried to sell the company for less than half its value while transferring our core IP through backdoor channels." Maya stepped forward, pulling up a presentation on the screen behind me. We've uncovered evidence of systematic corporate espionage, she explained. James and Rebecca Palmer, Global Tech's VP of Acquisitions, created a shadow company to funnel our technology and client data to our competitors. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. These people had trusted James, had believed in his leadership. Finding out he betrayed not just me, but all of them, hit hard. There's more, I continued once the noise died down. We discovered that at least 3 other tech startups were targeted by the same scheme. Global Tech would identify promising companies, insert themselves through various means, usually romantic relationships with key executives, and then systematically strip the companies of their assets. I clicked to the next slide, showing the pattern of failed startups in Global Tech's wake, but they made one crucial mistake with us. They underestimated how many safeguards my father put in place before he died. The next few hours were a blur of questions, explanations, and reassurances. By the end of the day, our entire team knew the truth and, more importantly, understood their role in what came next. Because this wasn't just about saving quantum tech anymore. We had a chance to expose a corporate conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of smaller companies. That evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the evidence we gathered, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Chen? A woman's voice said when I answered. This is Rebecca Palmer. We need to talk. I put the call on speaker so Maya could hear. I think your lawyers would advise against that, Ms. Palmer. My lawyers don't know I'm calling, she replied, her voice tense. Look, you have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes way beyond James or Global Tech. Then enlighten me. She paused and I could hear traffic in the background. Not over the phone. Meet me at the Riverside Park in an hour. Come alone. I looked at Maya, who was already shaking her head. It's a trap, she mouthed. Why should I trust you? I asked Rebecca. Because I have proof that your father's death wasn't natural, she said quietly. The cancer diagnosis, it was engineered. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. What? 1 hour. The bench by the fountain. Don't be late. The line went dead. Maya was already on her phone, calling her contacts in law enforcement. Within 30 minutes, we had plainclothes officers positioned throughout the park and a wire hidden under my jacket. Rebecca was already at the bench when I arrived, looking nothing like the polished executive from the surveillance photos. Her designer suit was wrinkled, her hair disheveled. They're going to kill me, she said without preamble. Once they realize I'm talking to you, I'm dead. Who's they? She pulled out a USB drive with shaking hands. It's all here, the whole operation. Global Tech isn't just stealing technology. They're eliminating anyone who might expose them. Your father figured it out. That's why they had to move quickly with James. I felt sick. Are you saying they murdered my father? They have people inside pharmaceutical companies, hospitals. They can make anything look natural. She pressed the USB drive into my hand. James doesn't know the half of it. He thought this was just corporate espionage, but it's... A sharp crack split the air. Rebecca's eyes went wide, then blank. She slumped forward as screams erupted around us. The next few hours were chaos. Police swarming the park, reporters gathering at the edges, Maya pulling strings to keep my name out of the immediate coverage. The USB drive contained everything: internal emails, financial records, medical documents. A conspiracy so vast it seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of Quantum Tech's scheme again, but this time with federal agents beside me. The investigation is ongoing, I explained, but arrests are being made. Global Tech's entire executive board, hospital administrators, even some government officials who helped cover it up. James had already pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his testimony. He would serve time, but more importantly, he would help bring down the people who had murdered my father. Maya touched my arm gently. Ready for the press conference? I nodded, straightening my jacket. Outside, cameras waited to hear the story of how a small tech company had uncovered one of the biggest corporate conspiracies in recent history. But first, I had one stop to make. At my father's grave, I placed fresh flowers and the news article announcing Global Tech's downfall. You tried to protect me, I whispered. Now I'm finishing what you started. The company would recover. We'd already landed 3 major contracts from Global Tech's former clients. Our team was stronger than ever, united by what we'd overcome together. As for me, I was different now. Stronger, yes, but also more cautious. Trust, as my father had said, was good, but control and justice were better. The headlines would call it a story of corporate greed and betrayal, but for me, it was simpler than that. It was about a daughter finally understanding her father's last lesson, about a woman reclaiming her power, and about truth finally coming to light. James had tried to steal my company, but he'd given me something instead, the chance to expose a corruption that had cost lives, including my father's. Sometimes I realize the greatest victories come from our deepest losses, and sometimes justice wears many faces. The detective slid the note across the interrogation room table, his eyes studying my face for any sign of guilt. Mrs. Mitchell, would you like to explain this? I looked down at my husband Jack's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm dead. My wife Rebecca killed me. She's been planning it for months. Don't let her get away with this. My hands didn't shake as I pushed the paper back. I'd like to explain something, Detective Harris, I said calmly, but probably not what you're expecting. It had been 3 days since Jack disappeared. 3 days since they found his car abandoned by the river, blood splattered across the driver's seat. 3 days of watching my sister Rachel play the part of the devastated sister-in-law, while secretly helping the police build their case against me. What they didn't know was that I'd been building my own case for months. Go ahead, Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Harris said, leaning back in his chair. We're all ears. I opened my purse and pulled out a USB drive. Before I give you this, I need you to understand something. I'm not just going to tell you what happened to Jack. I'm going to show you how he and my sister planned this whole thing, and how they messed up in ways they never imagined. The detective's eyebrows rose slightly. You're saying your husband faked his own death? Yes, I replied, and tried to frame me for it so he and my sister could start a new life together with his life insurance money. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was married to a man who thought he could destroy my life and get away with it. But I'm also a forensic accountant, and if there's one thing I know, it's that numbers don't lie, even when people do. 6 months earlier, I was working late at my office, combing through financial records for a client when I noticed something odd in my own bank statements. A series of small transfers, carefully spread out to avoid detection, moving money from our joint account to an unknown destination. Most people wouldn't have caught it. The amounts were tiny, $50 here, $75 there, but they added up. Over 3 months, nearly $15,000 had disappeared. I didn't confront Jack immediately. Instead, I did what I do best. I followed the money. The transfers led me to a private account, and from there to a trail of receipts that told a story I wasn't prepared for. Hotel rooms booked under my sister's name. Dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants where Jack claimed he had business meetings. A down payment on a small apartment across town. But the real punch to the gut. A receipt for an engagement ring, purchased 2 weeks earlier. I sat in my dark office that night, staring at the evidence on my computer screen, and made a decision. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I would document everything, build an ironclad case, and wait to see what they were planning. I didn't have to wait long. Honey, Jack said one evening over dinner, his voice carefully casual. What would you think about increasing my life insurance policy? I looked up from my plate, keeping my expression neutral. Oh, why's that? He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Just thinking about the future, making sure you're taken care of if anything happens to me. I watched him push food around his plate, noting how his left hand trembled slightly, a tell he'd had since I met him. He was lying, and he was nervous about it. Sure, I said softly. That makes sense. The policy was increased to $2 million the next day. I started keeping a second set of books. Rachel came over more often after that, playing the role of the caring sister. She'd bring coffee, ask about my day, all while helping her lover plan my destruction. You work too hard, she said one afternoon, perched on the edge of my desk at home. You should take a break, maybe go visit Mom for a few days. I smiled, thinking of the hidden camera I'd installed in my home office. Maybe soon. Things are pretty busy right now. She touched my shoulder, and I wondered if she felt any guilt at all. You know I'm always here for you, right? I know, I replied, and I did know. I knew exactly what she was there for. The pieces of their plan became clearer each day. The life insurance policy, the secret apartment, the carefully orchestrated paper trail making me look unstable, jealous, potentially violent. They thought they were being clever, but they left traces everywhere. Burner phones with texts not quite deleted. Receipts for chemical supplies that could make Jack's blood appear to be in larger quantities than it was. Research on their shared laptop about dissolving bodies in lye. I documented everything, backing up files, photographing evidence, building my case methodically while they built their trap. The day before Jack disappeared, he kissed me goodbye like any other morning. "Love you," he said. And I wondered if he felt anything at all as he said those words. "Love you too," I replied, knowing it would be the last time I said it. 24 hours later, his car was found by the river, and my sister was at my door with tears in her eyes. "Becca," she sobbed, pulling me into a hug. "They found Jack's car. There's so much blood." I held her, feeling her tears soak into my shoulder, and thought about the camera in my necklace recording every moment of her performance. Now, sitting across from Detective Harris, I plugged the USB drive into his computer. "Everything you need is here," I said quietly. Bank records, photos, videos, communications between them planning this whole thing. And most importantly, proof that Jack is very much alive. The detective's eyes widened as he scrolled through the files. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is extensive." "I'm thorough," I said simply. "It's why I'm good at my job. It's also why they're going to regret ever thinking they could outsmart me." Harris looked up from the screen, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like respect. "Where do you think they are now?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Oh, I know exactly where they are. And in about 20 minutes, so will you?" Detective Harris stared at his computer screen, scrolling through the mountain of evidence I collected. "According to these records, your husband purchased one-way tickets to Mexico 2 days ago. Cabo San Lucas," I confirmed. "He and Rachel are staying at the Villa del Arco Resort, room 412, booked under the name James Cooper, his favorite alias. They used my money to pay for it." The detective's brow furrowed. "Your money? Remember those small transfers I mentioned? They weren't as clever as they thought. While they were stealing from our joint account, I was tracking every penny. Last week, I moved most of our assets to a private account, one they can't access." I pulled up my phone and showed him the resort's live webcam feed. There, lounging by the infinity pool, were Jack and Rachel, probably celebrating their successful escape. "They think they've won," I continued. "That I'm here being interrogated for murder while they start their new life. They have no idea I've been 10 steps ahead of them this whole time." Harris picked up his phone, already dialing. "I'll contact the Mexican authorities immediately." "Before you do that," I said, holding up a hand, "there's something else you should see." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were documents that would ensure Jack and Rachel's downfall wasn't just complete, it was spectacular. These are records of every illegal transaction Jack has made through his company over the past 5 years. Tax evasion, money laundering, fraud. I've been collecting evidence since I first suspected something was wrong in our marriage. The detective's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "Mrs. Mitchell, this could put him away for decades." "I know," I said quietly. "And Rachel too. She's been helping him cook the books since she became his company's accountant 2 years ago. That's how their affair started." I thought back to the day I hired the private investigator who photographed them together outside that hotel. I'd known then, watching them laugh and kiss like teenagers, that my marriage was over. But I'd needed more than just proof of their affair. I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. "There's something I don't understand," Harris said, looking up from the documents. "Why didn't you confront them when you first discovered the affair? Why go through all this?" I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "Detective, have you ever been betrayed by the 2 people you trusted most in the world?" He shook his head. "I grew up with Rachel. She was more than my sister, she was my best friend. And Jack, I loved him completely. When I realized they were sleeping together, it broke something in me. But when I discovered they were planning to frame me for murder, that they wanted to destroy my life so they could start over with my money." I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. That's when I decided they needed to learn a lesson about underestimating me. Harris nodded slowly. "And the blood in Jack's car?" "Pig blood," I replied. "Bought from a butcher shop last week. They needed it to look convincing. The receipt is on the USB drive, along with security camera footage of Rachel purchasing it. Just then, Harris's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for a moment, then looked at me with raised eyebrows. Mexican authorities have them in custody, he said. They tried to run when the police showed up, but didn't get far. They're being held for questioning until we can arrange extradition. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not relief exactly, but satisfaction. Let me guess. They're both claiming they have no idea what's going on. Harris nodded. Jack's demanding to speak with the American embassy. Says he's the victim of a misunderstanding. I couldn't help but laugh. Show him the suicide note. The one where he claims I killed him. I'm sure the embassy will be very interested in how a murder victim managed to write a note from beyond the grave. Mrs. Mitchell, Harris said, his tone serious. You do realize you'll have to testify against both of them. This won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy, detective, I replied. But I've spent 6 months preparing for this moment. I'm ready. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from Rachel. Becca, please. This isn't what you think. We can explain everything. I showed the message to Harris, who shook his head in disbelief. They still think they can talk their way out of this. They've always underestimated me, I said, deleting the message without responding. It's why we're here, and they're in a Mexican jail. The next few hours were a blur of statements and paperwork. I walked the detective through every piece of evidence, every document, every recording. By the time we finished, the sun was setting over the city. We'll need you to come back tomorrow, Harris said as I gathered my things. There's more paperwork to fill out, and we'll need formal statements about everything. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 3 days was wearing off, leaving me drained. One more thing, Harris added as I reached the door. How did you stay so calm through all of this? Most people would have fallen apart. I turned back to face him. Detective, when someone tries to destroy you, you have 2 choices. You can break down, or you can become unbreakable. I chose the latter. As I walked out of the police station that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Jack, his number showing up as unknown. I know you're behind this, his message read. You've ruined everything. How could you do this to us? I stared at the words, marveling at his audacity. Even now, caught in his own trap, he was trying to make me the villain. I typed out a response. No, Jack. You and Rachel ruined everything when you decided to frame me for murder. I just made sure you faced the consequences. Then I blocked his number, got in my car, and drove home to the house that was now mine alone. I woke the next morning to breaking news headlines splashed across my phone. Local businessman and sister-in-law arrested in murder hoax. The story was everywhere, complete with their mugshots from Mexican custody. Jack looked shell-shocked, his normally perfect hair disheveled. Rachel's makeup was streaked with tears. Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages from friends, family, and coworkers. Everyone wanted to know how I was holding up, how I'd discovered their plan, whether I'd seen the signs before it was too late. I ignored them all and drove to the police station for my formal statement. Detective Harris was waiting with a cup of coffee and a thick stack of papers. You've caused quite a stir, Mrs. Mitchell. The DA is very interested in this case. I imagine he is, I replied, settling into the chair across from him. How are our lovebirds doing in Mexico? Not well, he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. They're being extradited today. Jack's company board has already voted to remove him as CEO, and they're launching their own investigation into the financial crimes you uncovered. I nodded, unsurprised. They'll find more. Jack's been embezzling for years. I only scratched the surface in my investigation. About that, Harris leaned forward. How did you know to start looking into his finances in the first place? I took a sip of coffee, remembering the moment everything changed. It was something Rachel said at Christmas last year. We were talking about Jack's company, and she mentioned how clever he was with creative accounting. The way she said it, there was this intimacy in her voice, like she was proud of him. That's when I knew. Knew they were having an affair. Knew they were up to something bigger, I corrected. The affair was just part of it. They were planning something, and I needed to find out what. As I finished giving my statement, Harris's phone buzzed. He checked it and looked up at me. They've landed. Want to watch their perp walk? I considered it for a moment. No, I said finally. I have somewhere else to be. That somewhere was Jack's company headquarters, where I had an appointment with the board of directors. They needed to understand the full scope of what Jack had done, and how I could help them fix it. I spent 3 hours walking them through the evidence, explaining how Jack had manipulated the books, where the missing money had gone. By the time I finished, they had offered me a consulting contract to help clean up the mess. "Mrs. Mitchell," the board chairman said as I prepared to leave, "I have to ask, why didn't you come forward sooner?" I met his gaze steadily, because I needed to understand everything first, not just the affairs or the fraud, but who they really were, what they were capable of. He nodded thoughtfully. "And now?" "Now they can face the consequences of their actions," I said simply. "All of them." The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. I sat in the courtroom, watching as Jack and Rachel were led in wearing orange jumpsuits. They wouldn't look at me, but I could see them whispering to each other when they thought no one was watching. Their lawyers tried to paint it as a lover's mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fraud charges alone carried a minimum sentence of 15 years. The attempted framing, the insurance fraud, the theft, it all added up. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head held high. Jack finally looked at me then, his eyes pleading for mercy. Rachel stared at her hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "Mrs. Mitchell," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you discovered your husband and sister's plan." I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them everything. The suspicious transfers, the secret meetings, the carefully orchestrated plan to frame me for murder. With each word, I watched Jack and Rachel shrink further into themselves. "And what made you decide to gather evidence rather than confront them immediately?" the prosecutor asked. I looked directly at Jack as I answered, "Because they thought I was weak. They thought I was so blinded by love and trust that I wouldn't see what was right in front of me. They underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake." The trial lasted 2 weeks. In the end, Jack was sentenced to 20 years for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted insurance fraud. Rachel got 12 years for her role in the scheme. They were both ordered to repay the money they'd stolen, plus damages. As they were led away, Rachel turned to me one last time. "I'm sorry, Becca," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." I didn't respond. Her words meant nothing now. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. I gave them one sentence: the truth always comes out. That evening, I sat alone in my home office, looking at old photos of happier times, my wedding day, family vacations, holidays where we all smiled and pretended everything was perfect. I took each photo out of its frame and dropped them into a box marked "Donate." My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Harris. "You okay?" I thought about his question carefully before responding. Was I okay? My husband and sister were in prison. My family was shattered. My life had been completely upended. But I was still standing, still fighting, still winning. "Yes," I texted back. "I'm more than okay. I'm free." I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and walked out of the office. Tomorrow, I would start my new consulting job. Next week, I would look at houses in a new neighborhood. In a month, I would take that vacation to Italy I'd always dreamed about. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that I had turned their betrayal into my triumph. They had tried to write my ending, but I had written my own beginning instead. The leather chair creaked as James leaned back, his perfectly pressed suit a stark contrast to his smug expression. "Emily, you have to understand," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Managing this kind of money requires experience, business sense, things you just don't have." I sat across from him in his home office, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. The inheritance papers from my grandmother's estate lay scattered across his massive mahogany desk. $12 million worth of assets, properties, and investments that he was so desperate to control. My name is Emily Chen, and at 42, I was watching my husband of 15 years try to manipulate his way into controlling my inheritance. The same man who had spent years subtly undermining my confidence, making me question my own judgment, was now showing his true colors in full force. "I've already spoken with our lawyer," James continued, straightening his tie with practiced precision. "The power of attorney paperwork is ready. Once you sign, I'll handle everything. You won't have to worry your pretty little head about it." The condescension in his voice made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. James had always been controlling, but he'd masked it well over the years. Small comments about my spending habits, suggestions that I shouldn't work because he made enough for both of us. Gentle criticisms about my decision-making that eroded my confidence bit by bit. But what James didn't know, what I'd made sure he didn't know, was that I wasn't the same naive woman he'd married 15 years ago. The past 6 months since my grandmother's passing had opened my eyes to things I'd been blind to for far too long. It started with a letter my grandmother had left me, along with the inheritance. "My dearest Emily," she'd written, "with this gift comes great responsibility, but also great opportunity. Trust yourself. You are stronger and smarter than they've led you to believe." Those words had struck something deep within me. My grandmother had always seen through James's facade, though she'd never directly criticized him. Instead, she'd spent years quietly preparing me for this moment, teaching me about investments, business, and most importantly, self-reliance. The day after I received the inheritance notice, I made an appointment with Sarah Chin, no relation, a financial advisor my grandmother had recommended. James didn't know about these meetings. I'd scheduled them during what he thought were my yoga classes. "Your grandmother was a shrewd businesswoman," Sarah had told me during our first meeting. "She built this fortune from nothing, and she chose you to carry on her legacy. Not your husband, not your cousins. You." Over the next few months, while James was busy plotting how to take control of my inheritance, I was quietly putting things in motion. Weekly meetings with Sarah, consultations with my own lawyer, not the family lawyer James had chosen, and careful documentation of every manipulative comment and action from my husband. I'd learned that James had been making inquiries about the inheritance before my grandmother's will was even read, speaking to financial advisors and lawyers about how to protect the assets. What he really meant was how to control them. Now, sitting in his office, watching him lay out his plans as if they were already set in stone, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and self-doubt he cultivated in me for years had been replaced by something stronger, certainty. "Are you listening, Emily?" James's sharp tone cut through my thoughts. "This is important. We need to get these papers signed before the estate is fully settled." I met his gaze, keeping my voice steady. "I hear you, James. You want power of attorney over my inheritance." He smiled, that practiced, patronizing smile I'd seen countless times before. "Exactly. You know, I only want what's best for us, for our future." What James didn't know was that I'd already secured my future without him. The meetings with Sarah hadn't just been about financial planning. We created a comprehensive strategy to protect my inheritance and my independence. 2 weeks ago, I quietly moved most of my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. The inheritance itself was already protected by an ironclad trust my grandmother had set up, one that explicitly prevented anyone else from gaining control without my consent. But the real surprise was something else entirely, something that would wipe that smug smile off James's face when he finally discovered it. "You seem distracted," James said, frowning slightly. "Is everything okay?" I nodded, standing up from my chair. "Everything's fine. I just need some time to think about all this. It's a big decision." He stood as well, coming around the desk to place his hands on my shoulders. His touch, once comforting, now made my skin crawl. "Don't overthink it, honey. You know I'll take care of everything." That night, as James slept soundly beside me, convinced his plan was working perfectly, I lay awake thinking about how different things would look in just a few days. The pieces were already in motion, set up carefully over months of quiet preparation. I thought about the moment James would realize what I'd done, how his carefully constructed facade would crumble. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. The next morning, James was already in his office when I came downstairs. I could hear him on the phone, his voice carrying through the closed door. "Yes, everything's proceeding as planned," he was saying. "She'll sign the papers this week. No, she has no idea about any of it. Trust me, I know how to handle my wife." I felt a familiar twist in my stomach at his words, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Determination. I pulled out my phone and pressed record, adding yet another piece of evidence to my growing collection. Later that day, I met with Sarah in a small cafe across town. James thought I was at my book club. Another convenient excuse I cultivated over the months. "Everything's ready," Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I opened the folder, reviewing the documents inside. Everything was there: bank statements, transfer records, and most importantly, proof of James's attempts to manipulate his way into controlling my inheritance. Unsure, I replied, closing the folder. He's left me no choice. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. The meeting with the estate lawyers is scheduled for tomorrow. James thinks it's just a routine signing, doesn't he? Yes, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. He has no idea what's really going to happen. That evening, James was in an unusually good mood. He ordered takeout from my favorite restaurant, opened an expensive bottle of wine, and was being extra attentive. I knew what this was, his way of buttering me up before the meeting tomorrow. I've been thinking, he said as we sat down to dinner. After we get everything sorted with the inheritance, we should take a vacation. Maybe that trip to Europe you've always wanted? I smiled, playing along. That sounds lovely. He reached across the table to take my hand, his thumb stroking my palm in what he probably thought was a soothing gesture. I know all this legal stuff has been stressful for you, but after tomorrow, you won't have to worry about any of it. I'll handle everything. I squeezed his hand gently, thinking about how different things would look in just 24 hours. You're right, James. After tomorrow, everything will be different. As we got ready for bed that night, I watched him go through his usual routine, checking his phone one last time, setting out his clothes for tomorrow, meticulously arranging everything just so. James had always been about control, about maintaining the perfect image. Big day tomorrow, he said, climbing into bed beside me. Try to get some sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to his breathing even out as he drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow would indeed be a big day, just not in the way he expected. I thought about the past 15 years, about all the little moments that had led to this. The way James had gradually isolated me from my friends, how he'd discouraged me from pursuing a career, his constant subtle criticism disguised as concern. But I also thought about my grandmother, about her strength and wisdom. She'd seen this coming long before I had, and she prepared me for it in her own way. Remember Emily, she told me once, true strength isn't about having power over others. It's about having power over yourself. Tomorrow I would finally show James exactly what that meant. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I watched James get ready for the meeting, methodically knotting his silk tie and adjusting his cuffs. Every movement precise, controlled, just like everything else in his life. Wear something professional, he said, eyeing my casual attire with disapproval. First impressions matter, even if it's just a signing. I nodded, hiding my amusement at his assumption that this was just another signing. While he finished getting ready, I changed into a tailored navy suit, one my grandmother had helped me pick out months ago. Every warrior needs proper armor, she'd said with a knowing smile. The drive to the law office was quiet. James kept glancing at me, probably interpreting my silence as nerves. His hand patted my knee in what he likely thought was a reassuring gesture. Just follow my lead, he said as we pulled into the parking lot. Let me do the talking. The law office of Morrison and Associates occupied the entire top floor of a sleek downtown building. As we stepped out of the elevator, I saw James's shoulders straighten, his game face sliding into place. He had no idea what was waiting for us behind those glass doors. Mr. and Mrs. Preston, the receptionist greeted us with a professional smile. They're ready for you in the main conference room. James strode ahead of me, confident as always. But when we entered the conference room, his steps faltered. Instead of just the estate lawyer he expected, the long table was occupied by several people. Sarah Chen, my financial advisor, Marcus Wong, my personal attorney, and Catherine Morrison herself, the firm's senior partner. What's going on? James asked, his voice sharp. I thought this was just a signing. Please have a seat, Catherine said, gesturing to the chairs. We have quite a bit to discuss. I took my seat at the head of the table, not beside James where he clearly expected me to be. His face tightened as he lowered himself into a chair, his knuckles white where they gripped the armrests. Catherine opened a folder in front of her. Mrs. Preston has asked us to review some concerning matters regarding her inheritance and your recent attempts to gain power of attorney. James's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. Emily, what is this? Let me explain, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I know about everything, James. The calls to your lawyers about controlling my inheritance before grandmother even passed away. The consultations about having me declared financially incompetent. The offshore accounts you've been preparing. His face paled slightly, but he quickly recovered. That's ridiculous. I've only been trying to protect our interests. Our interests? Sarah Chen cut in, sliding a document across the table. Is that why you've been making inquiries about transferring Mrs. Preston's inheritance into accounts only you would control? James's jaw clenched. Emily, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. In fact, let me play something for everyone. I pressed play, and James's voice filled the room. Yes, everything's proceeding as planned. She'll sign the papers this week. No, she has no idea about any of it. Trust me, I know how to handle my wife. The color drained from his face as the recording continued, detailing his plans to gain control of my inheritance through whatever means necessary. That's just taken out of context, he sputtered, but I could see the panic rising in his eyes. Catherine Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Preston, we have documented evidence of multiple attempts to fraudulently gain control of your wife's inheritance. Would you like to explain that? James's composure finally cracked. Emily, he hissed, you have no idea what you're doing. You need me. You've always needed me. I met his gaze steadily. No, James. I don't need you. I never did. What I needed was to see you for who you really are. Marcus Wong cleared his throat. Mrs. Preston has already taken steps to protect her inheritance through a series of trusts that you cannot access. Additionally, he paused, sliding another document forward. These are divorce papers. James stared at the papers, his face contorting with rage. Divorce? You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you, everything you've done to me, I corrected. The manipulation, the control, the constant undermining of my confidence, it stops now. You'll never manage without me, he spat, his carefully maintained facade completely crumbling. You're nothing without me. Nothing. I stood up, placing my hands flat on the table. That's where you're wrong, James. I'm not nothing. I'm my grandmother's granddaughter, and she taught me better than to let someone like you control my life. Sarah Chen spoke up. Mrs. Preston has demonstrated remarkable financial acumen over the past 6 months. She's already made several successful investment decisions that have increased her inheritance by 15%. James's head whipped around. 6 months? You've been planning this for 6 months? Actually, I said, allowing myself a small smile. Grandmother and I had been planning this for years. She saw right through you from the beginning. Every lunch date, every shopping trip, she was teaching me, preparing me for this moment. Catherine Morrison pulled out another set of documents. Mr. Preston, given the evidence of your attempted financial manipulation, we're prepared to file charges unless you agree to an uncontested divorce with the terms Mrs. Preston has outlined. James snatched the papers, his eyes scanning the contents. With each page, his face grew redder. You can't be serious. You expect me to just walk away with nothing. Not nothing, I corrected. You can keep your own assets, but my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, that stays with me, where it belongs. This is insane, he muttered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You've all lost your minds. No, James, I said quietly. For the first time in 15 years, I'm thinking clearly. You have until the end of the week to decide. Sign the papers and walk away or face fraud charges. Your choice. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You'll regret this, he snarled. You have no idea what you're doing. As he stormed out of the conference room, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Years of subtle manipulation, of doubting myself, of trying to be what he wanted. All of it falling away with each step he took. Catherine waited until the door closed behind him before speaking. Are you all right, Mrs. Preston? I nodded, surprised to find that I truly was. Yes, I am. For the first time in a very long time, I really am. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. James, faced with overwhelming evidence of his attempted manipulation, finally signed the divorce papers. He moved out of our house, my house now, taking only his personal belongings. I heard through mutual friends that he was telling everyone I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I was making a huge mistake. But his words didn't have the same power over me anymore. Sarah helped me take full control of my investments, and true to my grandmother's teachings, I proved to be quite adept at managing my own finances. The inheritance wasn't just money, It was freedom, independence, and a chance to finally be myself. One evening, about a month after the confrontation, I was sorting through some old boxes when I found a photo album. Inside was a picture of my wedding day, James and me smiling at the camera, looking perfect and polished. But what caught my eye was my grandmother in the background, watching us with a knowing look. She'd seen it all coming, had prepared me for this moment long before I even realized I needed preparing. Her inheritance wasn't just about the money, it was about giving me the strength to stand on my own. I closed the album and walked to my home office, once James's domain, now my space. On the wall hung a photo of my grandmother and me, taken just months before she passed away. Her eyes sparkled with the same determination I now felt every day. "Thank you," I whispered to her image, "for everything." My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, another investment opportunity she wanted to discuss. As I read through the details, I couldn't help but smile. James had been so convinced I couldn't handle money, couldn't make decisions, couldn't survive without him. But here I was, not just surviving but thriving, managing my inheritance, making my own choices, and finally living life on my own terms. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I never would have imagined when I was caught in James's web of control. It wasn't always easy. Independence never is, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. Hi, I'm James Martinez, and this is the story of how my stepfamily's greed became their biggest downfall. They thought they were getting a failing restaurant, but they didn't realize what they were really buying, or rather, what they weren't. My father's restaurant, Casa Martinez, had been the heart of downtown Chicago for 30 years. It wasn't just a business. It was our family's legacy, built from the recipes my grandmother brought from Mexico and the dreams my father carried when he immigrated here with nothing but hope in his pockets. I grew up in that kitchen, learning every recipe, every secret, every tiny detail that made our food special. The smell of roasting chilies and fresh tortillas was the soundtrack of my childhood. But everything changed when my mother passed away, and 2 years later, my father married Diana. Diana came with 2 sons from her previous marriage, Marcus and Alex. From day one, they looked at Casa Martinez not as a family legacy, but as a goldmine waiting to be exploited. They saw our loyal customers, our prime location, our reputation, and they wanted it all. At first, they played nice. Diana would help at the restaurant, learning the operations while her sons took management positions. My father, still grieving and lonely, was just happy to have a full house again. I watched it all from the kitchen, where I worked as head chef, keeping my mother's recipes alive. "James, honey," Diana would say, her voice sweet as syrup, but her eyes cold as ice, "don't you think it's time to modernize? These old recipes, they're so traditional. People want fusion cuisine now." But our customers didn't want fusion. They came for my grandmother's mole sauce, for the tamales that took 2 days to prepare, for the traditions that made Casa Martinez special. Our revenue proved it. We were doing better than ever. Then my father got sick. Cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. Everything happened so fast. Between hospital visits and chemotherapy sessions, Diana and her son started making changes. They hired new staff, changed suppliers, and slowly pushed me away from operational decisions. "Just focus on cooking," James, Marcus would say, waving away my concerns about their expensive renovations. "Leave the business to those who understand it." I had a business degree from Northwestern and had practically run the restaurant for the past 5 years, but they conveniently forgot that. One night, as I was closing up, I overheard Diana and her sons in the office. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their words froze me in place. "The lawyer says we can do it," Diana was saying. "Robert's too sick to properly manage his assets. If we can prove the restaurant is failing, we can get emergency power of attorney and force a sale before he recovers, if he recovers." "But it's not failing," Alex objected. "It's making more money than ever." "That's why we need to help it fail," Marcus replied with a laugh. A few health code violations, some bad reviews, a couple of convenient kitchen accidents. I felt sick to my stomach. They were planning to deliberately tank my father's life's work. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They underestimated how much I'd learned over the years. What they didn't know was that 6 months earlier, when my father first got his diagnosis, he had signed over several key aspects of the business to me. Not the building or the restaurant itself. He wanted those to stay in his name until he was gone. but he gave me something far more valuable. I spent the next few weeks watching as they executed their plan. Suddenly we had health code violations. Mysterious bad reviews appeared online. Equipment started breaking down mysteriously. Our reputation was taking hits, and I could see the stress wearing on my father. Deanna played her part perfectly, acting concerned and supportive, while suggesting that selling might be the best option. The stress isn't good for your health, darling, she'd tell my father. Let's just sell it and focus on your recovery. Finally, they made their move. At the hospital, with my father weak from chemotherapy, Diana brought in her lawyer. They had papers showing the restaurant's recent struggles, the mounting debts that they had created, and a proposal. Sell the restaurant now, to them, for a nominal fee of $1, to keep it in the family. My father, tired and confused, looked at me. James, what do you think? Diana jumped in before I could answer. James understands this is for the best, don't you, James? You can still be the chef, if you prove yourself worthy of the position. I looked at my father, then at Diana's smug face, and nodded slowly. If that's what you want, Dad. The next day, we all gathered at the restaurant for the official handover. Diana had invited their friends, making it a celebration of their rescue of a failing family business. The lawyer laid out the papers as Diana practically bounced with glee. Just sign here, James, she said, pointing to the line at the bottom of the transfer document. It's only worth $1 now anyway, thanks to your inadequate management. I signed my name with a steady hand, then looked up at their triumphant faces. Congratulations, I said quietly. The building and business are yours. Finally, Marcus exclaimed. Now we can make some real changes around here. I packed up my personal items from the office, including my mother's old recipe box. As I headed for the door, Diana called out, "Don't forget to be here early tomorrow. Just because you're not the owner anymore doesn't mean you can slack off." I turned back with a small smile. "Oh, I won't be coming in tomorrow, or ever again, actually." "What are you talking about?" Alex demanded. "You see," I said, "you just bought a building and a business name. But 6 months ago, my father transferred something else to me. I own all the recipes, every single one. They're fully copyrighted and trademarked under my personal holding company. I also own the Casa Martinez brand identity, logo, and most importantly," I paused, watching their faces, "I own all the supplier contracts and relationships personally." The color drained from Diana's face as I continued. "So congratulations on your new restaurant. I'm sure you'll do great serving whatever it is you plan to serve. It just won't be Casa Martinez food. Oh, and those suppliers you've been working with. They'll be delivering to my new location across town starting tomorrow." The silence that followed was deafening. Diana's perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Those recipes belong to the restaurant." Actually, I pulled out another set of documents from my briefcase. They don't. Everything was legally transferred to Martinez Culinary Group, LLC, my company, months ago. Dad knew what he was doing. He might be sick, but he's far from stupid. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing my shirt. "You little snake. You planned this all along." "Careful," I warned calmly. "Assault charges wouldn't look good for your new business. And yes, I planned this, right after I overheard you plotting to deliberately tank my father's legacy." Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was frantically flipping through the sale documents. This is highly unusual," he stammered. "The intellectual property should have been included in the sale." "Check page 37, I suggested. "The sale clearly specifies physical assets and business name only. You really should read the fine print more carefully." Diana's face contorted with rage. "We'll sue you." "Well, sue me for what?" I interrupted. "For legally protecting my family's heritage? For stopping you from destroying what my father built? Go ahead. Oh, and while you're at it, you might want to explain to the judge how you manipulated a cancer patient into selling his life's work for $1. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing. I've submitted all documentation of your deliberate health code violations to the city health department. They're very interested in speaking with the new owners. I'd expect them first thing tomorrow morning." As I walked out of Casa Martinez for the last time, I heard Diana's anguished scream of rage. But I didn't look back. I had work to do. The next 6 months were a whirlwind. While Diana and her son struggled with health department investigations and tried to create new recipes for their empty restaurant, I was busy building something new. I opened Mama Martinez's kitchen just across town, taking our loyal staff, suppliers, and most importantly, our recipes with me. The grand opening was packed with familiar faces, customers who'd been coming to us for decades, who knew the taste of our authentic food couldn't be replicated. Word spread quickly. Food critics raved about how we preserved the traditional flavors while upgrading to a beautiful new location. Our old customers followed us, bringing new ones with them. Within months, we had lines out the door every weekend. Meanwhile, Diana's version of Casa Martinez floundered. Without our recipes, suppliers, or experienced staff, they couldn't recreate what made the restaurant special. They tried serving generic Mexican food, then attempted fusion cuisine, but nothing worked. The reviews were brutal. "It's like a soul has been ripped out of the place," one reviewer wrote. "The magic is gone." 3 months after their takeover, my father's cancer went into remission. The doctors called it a miracle, but I think it was pure stubbornness. He wasn't going to let go until he saw justice served. The first day he was strong enough, he came to Mama Martinez's kitchen. He walked through the dining room, tears in his eyes, touching the familiar decorations we'd moved from the old place. The photos of our family, the hand-painted plates my mother had collected, the string of peppers my grandmother had hung for good luck. In the kitchen he watched as I prepared his favorite dish, chile en nogada, just like his mother taught me. "You did good, Mio," he said softly. "You protected our legacy better than I ever could." Diana and her sons tried to hold out, but the numbers didn't lie. 6 months after their triumphant takeover, they were forced to sell the building, at a massive loss. The final insult? The buyer was my newly formed real estate company. I kept the building but leased the space to a local art gallery. Sometimes I walk by the old location, remembering the sounds and smells that filled it for so many years. The Casa Martinez sign is gone, but the memories remain. Last week, I received a letter from Diana's lawyer, offering to reconcile our differences and propose a partnership. I sent back a simple response. Some things aren't for sale at any price. Mama Martinez's kitchen has now expanded to 3 locations, each one serving the same recipes that my grandmother brought from Mexico all those years ago. My father, now fully recovered, comes in every Sunday to have lunch and tell stories to the customers about how it all began. As for Diana and her sons, last I heard, they left Chicago, their dreams of an easy takeover shattered. They learned the hard way that a restaurant isn't just a building or a business. It's the heart and soul that goes into every dish, the love passed down through generations, the traditions that can't be bought or stolen. Yesterday, a young culinary student asked me why I didn't just let them have the old restaurant and start fresh somewhere else. I showed her my mother's old recipe box, the pages worn and stained with decades of use. Because some legacies, I told her, are worth fighting for. The old Casa Martinez building still stands downtown, now filled with beautiful artwork instead of dining tables. But the real Casa Martinez, the soul of it, lives on in Mama Martinez's kitchen, where every dish we serve carries the story of a family that refused to be beaten, a legacy that couldn't be stolen, and the sweet taste of justice served piping hot. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in our case, it was served at exactly 165 degrees Fahrenheit, just like my grandmother's perfect enchiladas.
Hello everyone, I'm Betty, and I'd like to share a significant chapter of my life, one that involves challenges with my in-laws and my husband while navigating a difficult divorce. I hope my story resonates with anyone who's faced unfair criticism from their in-laws. Let me take you back to where it all began. I met Kevin, my now estranged husband, on a dating app when I was a 20-year-old college student. Kevin was 26, established, and financially stable. Despite our age difference, we fell in love quickly. I've always believed that love isn't confined by age or appearance, so Kevin's being older was never an issue for me. However, Kevin struggled with our age gap. He often asked, "Why are you with me, Betty? You could find someone your age, someone who might be a better match," but I chose him because I loved him. And to me, age was just a number. Kevin's insecurities ran deep, and he would press, "There must be another reason. It's not normal for someone like you to be with someone like me. Please, just tell me the real reason." I reassured him again and again that my feelings were genuine, that I wasn't interested in dating someone my age. I loved him for who he was, and that was what mattered to me. Yet, his self-doubt remained, hinting at deeper issues of self-esteem that seemed to have kept him single before we met. Wanting to prove my love, I made sure Kevin never spent excessively on me. As a college student, I wasn't wealthy, but I bought him thoughtful gifts and managed my own finances. I worked part-time jobs, ensuring I wasn't financially dependent on him. Kevin seemed to appreciate these efforts, but sadly, his insecurities didn't fade. He continued to question the sincerity of my love, which hurt deeply. It took 3 years before I truly understood where Kevin's issues were coming from. When I met his parents, Samuel and Charlotte, I began to see the root of his struggles. Samuel, Kevin's father, had experienced a sudden windfall when he won the lottery, which changed their lives overnight. This newfound wealth gave me insight into the environment that shaped Kevin's views and insecurities. After winning the lottery, Samuel and Charlotte bought a lavish house and invested wisely. However, their wealth came with a sense of superiority. During our first meeting, Samuel boasted, "Not everyone makes it big like I did. I worked hard, and look where it got me. Do you know how rare it is to win the lottery? I did it on my first try." They were proud of their financial success, often implying that Kevin, despite his college education, would never reach their level. Charlotte often hinted that Kevin's previous partners had only been after his money, leaving him once they were financially secure. They openly doubted his ability to make good decisions, which infuriated me. It was clear that Kevin's parents painted every woman he dated as a gold digger, and over time, Kevin started to believe this narrative. The insinuation that I, too, was just after his money became an embarrassing and hurtful part of their story. Fed up with their baseless assumptions, I finally stood up for both Kevin and myself. "I'm sorry, but I have to disagree," I said. "Kevin has worked hard to build his career, and in time, he will achieve even greater success. But that doesn't mean women are after his money." Samuel retorted, "That doesn't change the fact that women only want him for money. We worked hard for what we have, but Kevin does co-own the house. Eventually, it will be his. Every time these girls see our $350,000 house, I swear, they just see dollar signs." I couldn't hold back any longer. "I can't speak for Kevin's past relationships, but I'm certainly not in this for the money. I love your son, and that's why we're together. I have no interest in your house." Charlotte then said, "Don't worry, Betty. Sometimes it's hard to accept that people can be successful and live in nice houses. You live in a small rented apartment with roommates. You might start desiring it after spending time around our house." Their comments pushed me to my limits. I was on the verge of losing my temper, but Kevin, who had been listening, said nothing. He didn't defend me or himself. Instead, he changed the subject. On our way home, I was taken aback by his indifferent attitude after such a tense visit with his parents. I knew I had to address the issue directly with Kevin. "Kevin, your parents are being unfair and hurtful to both of us. Why didn't you stand up for me?" Kevin sighed, his frustration clear. "What did you expect me to say, Betty? My past isn't exactly encouraging. I've been used before by people who only saw my parents' wealth, making plans for when they'd inherit the house. Even if they were wrong about those women, that doesn't mean they're wrong about everything. I felt a pang of hurt. Even if those women were after your money, that doesn't mean I am. It hurts that you stayed silent while your family insulted me." Kevin looked conflicted. "You know my family's wealthy now, and maybe they have a point. I'm not accusing you of having bad intentions, but I can see why it might look questionable to others. You don't have parents, and because of that, you might seem more reliant on my inheritance." His words were almost too much to bear. "What you're suggesting is absurd, Kevin. I've never pressured you to spend on me. Not having an inheritance doesn't make me a gold digger." Kevin remained stubborn, unwilling to see my side. "I love you, and that's what matters. Let's not argue about this anymore," he said, dismissing the conversation. While some might have found comfort in his declaration of love, I couldn't shake the feeling that he still doubted my intentions. I tried to discuss it again, even suggesting therapy to help him see things more clearly, but he refused, insisting there was nothing wrong. As time went on, I began distancing myself from his family. We got engaged right after I graduated from college, and I landed a decent job, which allowed me to start saving for our wedding. We shared the wedding expenses equally and married when I was 23. However, the next 4 years of our marriage were rocky. Kevin frequently visited his parents, returning each time more distant and upset. I knew Samuel and Charlotte were still poisoning his mind, continuing to brand me as a gold digger. Despite my pleas for him to reduce contact with them, Kevin kept seeing his parents often. Their negative influence started to deeply affect his view of our relationship, making him believe no one could love him for who he was.
Even after years of my unwavering love, Kevin's suspicions towards me never seemed to ease. The constant need to prove my sincerity grew more exhausting. But the moment that truly tested us came on Kevin's birthday. Wanting a low-key celebration, we decided to have a small cake party at home. Excited to make his day special, I surprised him with the expensive watch he'd admired for so long. Kevin was thrilled with the gift, but my heart sank when he suggested we show it off to his parents. Despite my hesitation, I agreed. When we arrived at his parents' house, Kevin couldn't wait to show off the new watch. "Mom, Dad, look at this beautiful watch Betty got me. I've wanted it for so long. Isn't it stunning?" His enthusiasm was palpable. Charlotte responded with a hint of surprise. "Oh, Kevin, it seems she does love you after all." We were quite worried for some time. But Samuel quickly added, "Don't be fooled, old Charlotte, she's a gold digger. She married our son because we have a $350,000 house. Let's not ignore the facts." I couldn't hold back my frustration. "Excuse me, why do you think I married your son for your house? I had been working and living in an apartment for years. Besides, if age was really a concern, why would I marry someone older unless I truly loved him?" I said, trying to hold my ground. "I assure you, I didn't marry Kevin for his money or for your house. I married him because I love him. Surely Kevin can confirm that, right?" To my shock, Kevin remained silent. His unwillingness to defend me in front of his accusing parents was unsettling, and I felt my heart sink. I looked at him, hoping for some reassurance, but he avoided my gaze. The silence between us grew heavy, his lack of response amplifying the harsh assumptions of his family. The more they criticized me, the more isolated I felt. Pushed to my limit, I finally confronted him. "Kevin, why aren't you saying anything? Your parents have always labeled me a gold digger. How will they ever see the real me if you don't speak up? Why are you so quiet? Tell them they're wrong." Kevin hesitated, his discomfort clear. He muttered, I don't know what you want me to say, Betty. Maybe my parents aren't completely wrong. There might be a possibility." His words trailed off, but the implication was unmistakable. The doubt in his voice, the hesitation to stand by me, was more than just a misunderstanding. It was a crack in the foundation of our relationship, a crack that threatened to cast a shadow over everything. My love for him, my place in his life, suddenly felt uncertain. The atmosphere at Kevin's birthday celebration, which had been intended to be special, quickly turned sour. I couldn't believe the accusations that were flying my way. "Are you serious right now, Kevin? You believe I married you for your assets?" His parents chimed in, their suspicion thick in the air. "Oddly, you've never talked about buying a house, have you? For someone renting, owning a home should be a priority. Our place is out of your price range. You could never afford something like this on your own. So marrying Kevin and settling here seems more logical." Kevin looked at me, his face a mixture of doubt and confusion. "Yeah, Betty, why would you marry me? You might have feelings for me, but I think there's more to it than just love." I was left speechless by their words. All the love and affection I had once felt for Kevin seemed to vanish in an instant. It wasn't just his parents' skepticism that hurt, it was Kevin's agreement with them that cut the deepest. In that moment, I knew I had to end our marriage, but I didn't reveal my decision right away. Instead, I waited for the right moment. Once Kevin and I were back home, I contacted a lawyer and began the divorce process. The lawyer reassured me that everything would be finalized within the week. In the meantime, I moved into a separate room to give myself some space. Kevin thought I was just cooling off. He had no idea what my intentions really were. When the divorce papers were ready, I packed my things and left. Kevin, clearly distressed, called me in a panic. I told him to meet me at a specific address and to bring his parents. He was confused, but he agreed. When they arrived, I was standing on the porch of a stunning house. Their expressions shifted as they took in the luxurious surroundings. "You must be wondering why I brought you here," I said, gesturing to the grand estate. "It's a beautiful house, isn't it? No one can compare their home to this one. It's worth around $3 million in today's market, quite expensive, right?" The dramatic setting was my way of showing them that their accusations were unfounded. I wasn't the person they thought I was, and I needed to make that clear, loudly and undeniably. "But it's worth every penny," I added, pointing to the lavish interior. "The furniture alone was worth millions." "What is this place, Betty?" Kevin asked, his confusion evident. I don't understand why you have access to such a house. Why don't you all come inside so we can talk properly? I suggested, brushing off their astonishment. I can't explain everything standing here on the porch. They followed me inside, their eyes widening at the opulent decor that greeted us. The owners had spared no expense in furnishing their home. As we settled into plush sofas, I took a deep breath, ready to address the elephant in the room. I've made a decision, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. That's why we're here. I filed for divorce. I handed Kevin the papers. We can proceed with an uncontested divorce if you agree. Kevin looked at me, his voice filled with confusion and concern. What? I don't understand. Why are you filing for divorce? It's simple, I replied, my tone firm. You and your parents think I'm a gold digger. You believe I married you for your house and your money. Despite everything I've said, you've refused to listen, so it's better for everyone if I leave, sparing you from what you deem my gold-digging tendencies. Kevin's disbelief was palpable. You're considering divorce just because my parents spoke what they believed to be the truth? That's ridiculous. I think it's for the best, I said, resolute. Kevin's mother, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, finally chimed in. If she's so adamant, you should just sign the papers, Kevin. At least then you can find someone who truly loves you. Kevin turned to me. Why did you bring us to this house, Betty? Do you expect me to buy this for you as part of our divorce settlement? I looked at him calmly. Why would I need you to buy this house, Kevin? This house is already mine. Their jaws dropped in shock. What? How can you afford a house like this? You're renting, and your job isn't enough to cover something like this. Stop lying to us, Kevin's father demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. I could see their disbelief, but I was ready to prove something far bigger than my financial independence. This revelation wasn't just about money, it was about declaring my autonomy. I had done it on my own, and I would never allow their doubts to define me again. This house is mine, I repeated firmly, and this is how I'm changing everything between us. Our relationship dynamics are forever altered. I'm not lying, I asserted, my voice steady as I saw the disbelief in their eyes. Kevin, remember when I told you my parents left me an inheritance? This house is part of it. It's in a trust for now, but I'll officially inherit it when I turn 31. I don't need a high-paying job, because I have a trust fund waiting for me. That's impossible, Kevin interrupted, his face etched with confusion. Your parents passed away years ago. They should have given you the house by now. I took a deep breath. My parents knew there were people who might try to take advantage of me, I explained. They put everything in a trust to protect it until I was old enough to understand what it meant. They wanted me to be settled with someone who genuinely cared about me, not someone who was after my money. Kevin's mother looked taken aback. Oh my God, Betty, you should have told us about this. We had no idea. This is a beautiful house. We could all live here very comfortably. Yeah, you should have shared that earlier, Kevin added, now looking relieved, though still somewhat embarrassed. We thought you were after our house. If we'd known. I always knew Betty was perfect for Kevin, his father chimed in, his tone shifting as he eyed the lavish surroundings. Look at this, she's a great match for him, look at her wealth. I couldn't help but laugh at the sudden shift in their attitude. It was dizzying how quickly their views of me had changed, but what struck me even more was how easily they'd forgotten about the divorce papers I had brought. Anyway, I said, pulling the divorce papers from my bag, here's my signature for an uncontested divorce. You can sign these if you agree. If not, we can take it to court, but I won't live with you anymore. Kevin looked at me, his eyes desperate. Wait, Betty, listen, there's no need to rush. You've proven you're not a gold digger. There's no reason to get a divorce now. We apologize for the misunderstanding. Doesn't that make things better? Kevin's parents nodded in agreement, but their words only fueled my frustration. I don't want your insincere apologies, I said, my voice firm. For 3 years, you allowed your family to label me a gold digger. You could have defended me, but you sided with them. You even accused me of it. I can't stay with someone who doesn't respect his wife. I'm done. They pleaded with me, asking me to overlook the past, but their lack of genuine remorse made it clear that nothing had truly changed. When I reached my breaking point, I demanded they leave, threatening to call the police if they didn't. My firm stance left them no choice but to leave. In the weeks that followed, Kevin and his parents relentlessly harassed me. They begged, pleaded, and even offered bribes, thinking money could sway my decision. It only fueled my anger, revealing their continued view of me as someone driven by financial gain. Ironically, since Kevin co-owned the house with his parents, I was entitled to half of his share, which only added to their desperation for reconciliation. Despite their relentless attempts, I stayed firm in my resolve to end things. I moved all my belongings to my parents' house, asserting my right to stay there, even before officially inheriting the property. Kevin and his family kept trying to reach me, but I changed my number to cut them off. Kevin even showed up at my workplace, but I had already informed security, and they asked him to leave. He still hadn't signed the divorce papers, holding on to hope that I would change my mind. Almost a year had passed, and the situation remained unresolved, a testament to the complexity and emotional weight of our lives entangled together. But I had made it this far on my own. I was financially stable, and though I had gone on a few dates, I wasn't ready for anything serious yet. A cousin of Kevin's told me his family was now scrambling to pay me my rightful share of the house. Their legal fees were mounting, and their savings were running low. Kevin had even suggested selling the house, harboring resentment toward his parents for the chaos they'd caused in his life. At this point, I couldn't care less about their dilemmas. My only focus was to be free from their toxic influence and move on with my life, leaving behind the chaos and negativity that had plagued me for so long. I am a 50-year-old woman who, from a young age, embraced a belief in reciprocity. I trusted that my diligence and kindness would be met with the same from others. This principle guided my relationships, and I firmly believed that treating people with compassion would inspire them to do the same. Even after marriage, I held on to this belief, hoping that my care and thoughtfulness toward my husband would be mirrored by him. Back then, the expectations placed on women were different. We were often expected to make sacrifices, and I accepted these norms wholeheartedly. I devoted myself to my husband and children, confident that these sacrifices would lead to a fulfilling future. Yet, life didn't unfold as I had hoped. Despite tireless efforts and countless early mornings dedicated to my family, my work often went unnoticed, overshadowed by complaints or minor mistakes. I wasn't forced into this lifestyle. I was just an ordinary person who married a coworker 5 years my senior, conforming to the societal norms of the time. After the birth of my daughter, I left my job to become a full-time housewife. I never regretted the decision, seeing it as a natural step for maintaining family harmony. My life wasn't glamorous like the stories in TV dramas, but it was stable and manageable, until my daughter reached 9th grade. That was when tragedy struck. My mother passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Amid my grief, I discovered my husband's affair. While I mourned, he found solace in someone else, growing distant and eventually demanding a divorce. In those days, divorce was heavily stigmatized. Despite his cold and irresponsible behavior, I hesitated to consider separation. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. Yet, with a daughter witnessing our crumbling marriage, I felt trapped. During a particularly heated argument about our impending separation, my father, recently widowed and deeply concerned, came to visit. Witnessing my distress, he encouraged me to leave with my daughter and offered us refuge. His support marked a turning point. With his help, I saw that clinging to a failing marriage was futile. Overwhelmed by his compassion and wisdom, I agreed to the divorce. In the settlement, my husband gave me $6,000 in cash. With my father's backing, I secured a modest 3-bedroom townhouse for my daughter and me. It became a fresh start, but I braced myself for the challenges ahead. As a divorced woman raising a teenager, I anticipated judgment and scrutiny. My daughter, like any adolescent, struggled with the upheaval and often voiced her frustrations. Yet, I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on the past. I had to provide for her, so I threw myself into finding stable work. Being an older, divorced woman with a dependent child posed challenges in the job market. Undeterred, I juggled multiple part-time jobs, worked night shifts, and took on freelance work whenever possible. As time passed, my daughter reached her senior year of high school. Despite our financial struggles, she excelled academically and found ways to thrive. Motivated to secure her future, I took a demanding job at a 24-hour restaurant. Enduring 11-hour shifts, I saved 2/3 of my earnings for her college tuition. Throughout, I faced judgment and gossip, particularly from married men who assumed I was vulnerable, but I persevered for my daughter's sake. The sacrifices were many, but I was determined to give her opportunities one never had. She became my anchor, giving me the strength to endure life's challenges. I clung to the hope that one day, we'd look back on these hardships with pride in our resilience. A year later, my daughter's outstanding academic performance earned her admission to Harvard University. That moment brought immense joy and validation, making all our struggles feel worthwhile. As she embarked on her college journey, I reflected on everything we had endured and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. knowing we had triumphed together. I felt a profound mix of pride and relief knowing that our shared sacrifices had led to such a promising new chapter in my daughter's life. Although I had managed to provide her with an education and a stable home, the emptiness left by her absence was palpable. We kept in touch regularly through phone calls, and during the initial months of her newfound independence, our relationship deepened. Her continued affection and connection were a comfort to me, and I treasured the growth in our bond despite the challenges we had faced. When my daughter graduated from college without financial burdens, a dream we had tirelessly worked toward, I felt an immense sense of accomplishment. I had hoped we might live together again, but to my surprise, she secured a job at a defense corporation and chose to live independently. To support her decision, I took out a bank loan and helped with the down payment for a condo near her workplace. As I aged and adopted a simpler lifestyle, my daughter blossomed into a stylish and confident career woman. Seeing her thrive brought me immeasurable joy, reinforcing the value of my sacrifices. In her success, I found great satisfaction, feeling the truth in the saying that people often forget their own needs in moments of joy. Despite the financial stability I had provided during her college years, her upcoming wedding presented a new challenge. Some questioned why I continued to struggle financially when my daughter was capable of supporting herself. Yet, I was determined to contribute to her wedding expenses to prevent any potential disdain from her future in-laws. My belief that sacrifices for her happiness would bring joy to us both kept me resilient. As she entered the dating world, I noticed a growing distance between us. Initially, the change hurt, but I came to understand that her adult life and relationships rightfully took precedence. I waited patiently, hoping she would mature and reconnect with me, realizing that priorities naturally shift during this phase of life. On her 28th birthday, however, I experienced a poignant moment. I had looked forward to celebrating together, but she told me she had plans with someone named Scott and reassured me that there was no need for any special preparations. While her intent may have been to ease my burden, her casual dismissal of the day stung. Her birthday, a day so significant to me, seemed to be just another day to her. Determined to see her, even briefly, I took the day off work and made an extra effort with my appearance before heading to her office. But what I encountered there left me reeling. In the lobby, I saw my ex-husband with his new partner, people I had long hoped to avoid. How he knew to be there puzzled me. When I tried to call my daughter, she abruptly hung up, claiming she was in a meeting. Feeling bewildered, I turned around and, to my shock, saw her cheerfully calling out to her father and embracing him warmly. Her boyfriend seemed to know my ex-husband and his wife, which deepened my sense of betrayal. It felt as though everyone had conspired against me. Drained and upset, I quickly left the scene. Reflecting on that day, I wrestled with a desire to confront both my daughter and my ex-husband, but a stronger urge to retreat and protect my heart won out. Despite the turmoil, I resolved to continue loving and supporting my daughter, holding on to the hope that time would bring understanding and healing between us. I found myself unable to reach out to her. Then, unexpectedly, my daughter came to visit, announcing her engagement and handing me a wedding invitation. As I read the invitation, my heart sank. The names printed on it stunned me. Though she was my daughter, I felt an intense urge to send her away. How could she treat me merely as a guest at her wedding? Unable to hold back, I confronted her, expressing my hurt at being marginalized during such a significant event. I'm not just a guest, I told her. I'm your mother. My daughter apologized, her voice hesitant, explaining that she felt trapped by the circumstances. She wanted to marry Scott, but his parents scrutinized every detail about her. Her revelation left me grappling with a mix of emotions, hurt by her actions, but torn by the need to understand her position. During our conversation, she shared her fears. She worried that my status as a divorced single mother and the struggles we endured might negatively impact how Scott's family viewed her. Her confession stung deeply. I couldn't hide my frustration. I reminded her of the sacrifices I had made, the years of working tirelessly in a restaurant to fund her education, the hardships we had faced together. Her actions felt like a betrayal. Yet, despite my pain, I tried to bridge the gap between us, hoping to find common ground as she approached this life-changing decision. But then she said something that shocked me. She brushed aside our shared struggles, focusing instead on her future comfort. She revealed that her father and his new partner, the very woman who had caused the breakdown of our family, had already met her future in-laws. The past doesn't matter, she said coldly, only the present does. Her dismissive attitude hit me like a blow. For the first time, I harshly expressed my disappointment. In response, she retaliated with a bitterness I hadn't expected. "If you want to remove me from your life," she said, "then reimburse me for the costs of raising me." The exchange escalated quickly, her words cutting deeply. She stormed out of my home, declaring us strangers. Left alone, I stared at the wedding invitation she left behind, noticing that another name, her father's, had taken the place where mine should have been. 2 years later, I received devastating news. My father, who had chosen to live independently to avoid burdening me, had passed away. His death hit me hard, bringing with it a painful realization of my shortcomings as a daughter. A few months after his passing, I inherited the modest condo where he had lived. It became a poignant reminder of the family ties and challenges that had shaped my life. As I stood in that condo, I thought about the money I had saved for my daughter's unused wedding. A bittersweet realization dawned. I had spent so much of my life sacrificing for others, trusting that my devotion would be enough, but perhaps I had neglected myself in the process. It was time to change. I decided to start living for myself, even if it felt late in life. Reflecting on everything I had endured, I resolved to prioritize my own desires and needs before it was too late. Amid these reflections, a close friend, a real estate broker I had worked with during my restaurant years, offered a glimpse of a new path forward. I had spent most of my life sacrificing for others, trying to meet expectations and ensure those I loved were cared for. But one day, a close friend, a real estate broker I knew from my restaurant days, challenged me to consider what I truly wanted. She encouraged me to break free from societal expectations that demand women sacrifice endlessly. Her words sparked something in me, a desire to live for myself. Though I felt pangs of regret for the years lost to sacrifice, a new sense of hope began to grow. Inspired, I decided to take a leap into the real estate business. Using my savings and the proceeds from selling my late father's condo, I studied auction bidding and took a bold step. To my astonishment, I became the owner of a building in a prime location almost overnight. 8 months later, after returning from a mountain climbing adventure, I moved into the top floor of my building, transforming it into a cozy home. I felt a sense of liberation, a fresh start to a life where my happiness took center stage. One evening, as I rested from my adventures, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Exhausted but curious, I opened it to find my daughter standing there. She was visibly pregnant, holding a chubby-cheeked toddler. With tears streaming down her face. Her life, she confessed, was in turmoil. Her husband had become violent and unfaithful. Now, on the verge of giving birth and needing to care for her young daughter, she sought refuge with me. Her arrival stirred a tempest of emotions. The wounds from our past, her disregard for my sacrifices, and our bitter parting, were still fresh. She admitted that beyond seeking shelter, she needed financial help. She even hinted at a claim to the money I had once set aside for her wedding and my inheritance. Caught between compassion and anger, I confronted her. "I saved for your education and your wedding. I sacrificed everything for you. You once told me to stay out of your life. Now, after all that, you come back and ask for money?" The bond between a parent and child isn't something to be exploited whenever it's convenient. Her response cut deep. "I am still your daughter. You raised me to be strong. But maybe you were too busy working to teach me how to be a better person. I've become selfish. But now, I have no one else. My father's new wife ran off with all his money, and he's disappeared trying to find her. If you abandon me, I'll be like an orphan, with no one to turn to. How could you turn your back on me and your grandchildren?" Her words overwhelmed me. In the heat of the moment, I pulled out all the cash I had and threw it at her. "Take this money," I said coldly, "but after this, don't come back. I won't let you walk in and out of my life as you please. Your life is important, but so is mine." I watched as she left, carrying her child and her unborn burden. The pain of asking my daughter to leave was almost unbearable, but her selfishness, and the echoes of past grievances, had become too much to endure. After that, my daughter never returned. Too proud to admit her mistakes, she cut ties entirely. I often wondered if things could have been different, if she had come back genuinely repentant, seeking forgiveness and understanding. Perhaps I would have found it in my heart to help her, to confront the mess her husband had made of their lives. But that moment never came. Instead, I was left to reflect on the complexities of our relationship, the pain of our separation, and the lessons I had learned. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. My daughter had erased me from her life to pursue a marriage that ultimately brought her misery. It left me questioning why both she and my husband had made such destructive choices, despite the sacrifices I had made for them. Now, I see that the only person truly living the life I envisioned is me. This experience taught me a valuable lesson. No matter how strong your relationships may seem, you must prioritize your own well-being. Betrayal can come from anyone, but the one person who should never betray you is yourself. Happiness, I've learned, doesn't come from the sacrifices you make for others, but from the efforts you invest in fulfilling your own life. My story may seem like a tale of a life half-lived, but I'm determined to fill the rest of it with experiences and joys meant solely for me. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings insight and encourages you to cherish your happiness and dreams. Let's cheer each other on toward a life fully lived. It seems like my mother-in-law caught wind of the fact that we'd bought a house. She called out of the blue with a shocking proposal, and on the other end of the line, I could hear my sister-in-law's laughter. My mother-in-law was excitedly suggesting that she move in with us. Does she really think her laughter goes unnoticed? Honestly, the idea of living with her, and the rest of the family, is the last thing I want. I thought Mason felt the same way, but now that they know about our new home, are they assuming we'll all live together? The thought of Mason agreeing to that fills me with dread, but I'm determined not to let them manipulate us. If this is their plan, I'll be ready to turn the tables. Reflecting on my past challenges, I'm not backing down. I am Nancy Deborah, 32 years old, and I work for a major financial corporation. Mason and I married 4 years ago, and we haven't started a family yet, not because we don't want to, but for specific reasons we both take seriously. We've agreed to focus on our careers first, striving for progress every day, and once we've established our professional lives, we'll begin building a stable environment for our future children. When the time is right, we'll revisit the idea of expanding our family. Recently, a major project I had been planning at work was a success, and I was officially promoted. My salary, which was already decent, got a nice boost. Mason didn't receive a promotion, but his raise was significant due to his tenure at the company. With both of our incomes rising, it finally felt like the perfect moment to turn our long-held dream of homeownership into reality. I approached Mason with the idea. I think it might be time for us to start thinking about getting our own place. What do you think? His response was immediate and enthusiastic. Is it time already? I could hear the excitement in his voice. I'd been thinking about it too, but since I haven't been promoted yet, I wasn't sure how to bring it up. Don't worry about that, I reassured him. It's not like only one of us needs to be earning. I was thinking we could put the house in my name since I'm earning more now. Really? He asked, surprised. Well, if you're okay with it, then yes, let's do it in your name. I smiled. All right, let's move forward with that. We can check out some model homes on our next day off. Sounds great. Let's not miss this chance, he said, sharing my excitement. I felt so grateful to have him by my side. We were in sync, and moments like these reminded me that I had made the right choice. The following week, we kept our appointment to view model homes. We toured different designs and started imagining what our own home could look like. Over weekends, we began sketching simple floor plans and researching online. During a visit to a construction company, they recommended that we take an active role in designing the house, rather than leaving everything to them, so that it truly reflected our personalities. While we both loved the idea, we admitted that our knowledge of architecture was limited, but we were eager to learn. As we continued balancing this project with our work, we made steady progress. But then, just as we were getting into the rhythm of it, the doorbell rang. Thinking it was just a delivery, I opened the door, only to find my mother-in-law standing there. Mom, what brings you here so suddenly? I asked, already bracing myself for whatever surprise she had in store. I asked, surprised by her sudden visit. Without a word, my mother-in-law slipped off her shoes and made herself at home. Hearing her, Mason came out, equally surprised. Mom, what's up? He asked. Didn't Nancy tell you? She replied, looking slightly puzzled. I spoke to her about it over the phone a little while ago. Mason turned to me, confused. Maybe Nancy forgot to mention it? That's not true, Mom, I interjected quickly. It's not forgetfulness. I've just been incredibly busy with work. I'm handling both my job and the household responsibilities, so my mind's constantly buzzing with tasks. Oh, you're such a thoughtful person, Mason, she said warmly. Your late father would have been so proud of how you support Nancy. I nodded, not entirely comfortable with the compliment, but Mason smiled. Then, she pulled a travel brochure from her bag, spreading it out on the table and pointing to a page marked with a post-it note. Listen, Mason, she said with a content smile. I've always dreamed of seeing Niagara Falls. Would you take me there, please? Mason and I both stared at her. speechless, our mouths hanging open as she continued, not missing a beat. "Come on, Mason, think of it as an act of filial piety," she urged. Mason, still flustered, finally managed to speak. "Wait a minute, Mom, this is a bit sudden, you're springing a trip on us." "Oh, you could come too, Nancy," she added casually. "I was thinking of asking Anna, but if Mason's coming, we could make it a family trip." "Anna?" Mason asked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Nancy is here. I can't just take time off work, and it feels weird to finance a trip for you and my sister." "That's not weird at all," his mother countered swiftly. "Spending money on family is a wonderful thing, don't you think?" She turned to me for support, clearly expecting me to agree. Though taken aback, I stood my ground. Spending your own money on family is fine, but imposing it on others is different. Her tone shifted immediately. "What do you mean by that? Are you suggesting I'm trying to extort travel expenses from Mason?" she asked, her voice laced with indignation. I tried to clarify without sounding too harsh. "I didn't mean it like that, but it did seem like you were expecting us to cover the trip." Her expression darkened. "That's terrible, Nancy, I had no such intention," she exclaimed, clearly upset. "You're making me out to be the villain in front of Mason." "I didn't mean to call you a villain," I quickly assured her, trying to ease the tension. "I just wanted to clarify." I responded truthfully to her question. "Okay, there's no need for excuses." My mother-in-law's eyes narrowed, her icy glare piercing through me. "Why are you so heartless? You must not like me, do you?" she accused. This wasn't the first time such a situation had unfolded. Whenever she visited, she always seemed to find a reason to ask for money, which she would then squander, often with Anna, Mason's sister. While the idea of supporting family sounds noble, in this case, it felt more like extortion. The dynamic shifted when Mason, out of kindness, gave them money, but I've never been comfortable with his mother or sister's constant demands. Mason once confided in me that after his father passed away, his mother and sister became incredibly selfish. His father, who had died when Mason was in high school, had managed their finances carefully, but without him, there was no one left to keep an eye on their spending. This included recklessly using up life insurance money. Anna worked part-time, earning a modest salary, which left their financial situation precarious. This, of course, was their frequent excuse for showing up at our door, claiming that life was tough or that they needed a break, subtly hinting that they needed money from Mason. Before I married Mason, it seemed he was constantly at the mercy of his mother's demands. There was a dependency on the care she provided after his father's death, but since marrying me, Mason had begun to see their true colors. Although they often asked for money, he had been making a conscious effort to refuse. Recently, he had even started to assert himself more with his mother, especially in response to her spiteful comments like, "You don't like me, do you?" Or "Why should I be nice to such an uncharming daughter-in-law?" Mason stood his ground. "Just because you're my mother doesn't mean you can speak badly of Nancy." "Didn't she just answer your question honestly?" "You're taking Nancy's side," his mother exclaimed, shocked. "What are you talking about?" "I think you're in the wrong here, Mom," Mason said firmly. "That's so unfair," she retorted, her voice full of indignation. "Surely Nancy must have poisoned your mind against me." "Poor thing, you were such a kind child before you got married." Mason, unwavering, responded, "I'm not saying this because of Nancy. I'm saying it because I truly believe it." His mother, clearly taken aback by his firm stance, was not used to being contradicted. Frustrated, she bit her lower lip before muttering, "Fine," and storming out of the house. "Nancy, I'm sorry," Mason said softly after a moment. "I always make you feel uncomfortable," Mason apologized once his mother had left. "No, it's okay," I reassured him. "Hey, you stood up for us this time." I smiled at him, trying to ease the tension. "Once we build our own home, we'll be further away. Maybe then we can minimize our interactions with your mom and sister." "That would be a relief," Mason agreed, sounding genuinely grateful. The location we were considering for our new house was significantly farther from our current apartment, but that distance would also make our commutes easier. Currently, our apartment was just 4 train stations away from Mason's parents' house, but the new house would be 3 times farther, requiring several transfers. The route was complicated, so unless we gave them the address, it was unlikely they would be able to find it. This move seemed like a perfect opportunity to distance ourselves from the constant, often uncomfortable family interactions. We submitted our floor plan ideas to the construction company, and 3 months later, construction began. About 8 months after that, our $800,000 dream home was completed. We managed to carve out some time from our busy schedules to pack a few days before the move. Then, in the midst of packing, I received a call from my mother-in-law. I put her on speakerphone while I continued to pack. "Hello?" I greeted her. "When are you moving? You bought a house, right?" "I want to live with you," she blurted out, her voice unusually high-pitched and catching me off guard. In the background, I could hear Anna, my sister-in-law, chuckling. "That's great. We can make Nancy work for us every day." "Mom, you came up with a good idea," Anna snickered. "Do they think I can't hear them?" It was clear they were planning to freeload off our move, imagining an easy life at our expense. Honestly, I had no intention of living with them, and I knew Mason felt the same way. But talking about our new house with them might have given them the impression that we'd all be living together. The idea that Mason could be colluding with them worried me, but I was determined not to let them dictate our lives. It seemed like they were trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. If that was their plan, I had to stay one step ahead. I informed them of our moving date, and immediately, my mother-in-law and Anna responded with their demands. "We'll come to your apartment in the afternoon on that day. Take us with you in the car and arrange the movers for us too," they demanded, before hanging up. Of course, I had no intention of fulfilling their requests. Before I could discuss this with Mason, I turned around and found him already standing there. "Mason, were you listening?" I asked, a bit caught off guard by his presence. "I was about to take a break and talk to you about this," he said. "Was that Mom on the phone just now?" "Yes," I replied, a little apprehensive. "I was going to talk to you about that too." "Why did you tell your mother about our new home?" I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, surprised. Mason sighed and explained, "It's not quite like that. Last time my mom visited, she saw the floor plan of our new house lying around. She's been pestering me about it every day since, so I eventually gave in. I'm sorry," he added quickly, his voice full of regret. "You don't think I intend to live with them, do you?" "Of course not, Mason," I reassured him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "After hearing that phone call, though, I think it might be better if we cut ties with them. It's just too much." Mason's expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw him more furious than I had ever seen before. It was a relief, in a way, he was on my side. He went on to explain that his mother had shown a surprising interest in the layout of our new home, pretending to casually inquire while bombarding him with questions about the number of rooms, the size, and all the details. It was clear she had been trying to find a way in, and this conversation only solidified our resolve. We both agreed it was time to set boundaries and protect our new life together from unwanted intrusions. I had reached my limit with his mother's overbearing behavior. She had caused enough chaos in our lives, and it was finally time to turn the page. We were ready to settle this issue once and for all. So, the day of the move arrived. Mason and I arranged for the movers to transport our belongings in the morning, and we drove to our new home. By the time we finished unloading and arranging everything, it was already past 2 p.m. We sat down to take a break, and that's when we checked our phones and found dozens of missed calls from my mother-in-law. "She called me too," Mason said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Just then, like clockwork, the phone rang again. I answered it, leaving the speakerphone on. "Hello?" I said. "Nancy, where are you? I told you I'd be at the apartment this afternoon, didn't I?" "Yes, you did say that," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "So, what can I do for you?" "What do you mean? You didn't arrange for the movers?" "I've been waiting at home, and not a single truck has shown up. I had to come to your apartment myself." "Well, that's too bad," I said coolly. "You know, I didn't arrange for any movers." "What? That's not the agreement. Where is your new house?" she demanded, flustered. "Do you think I'd tell you?" I countered firmly. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could almost hear her processing the fact that things had changed. She probably thought, as long as Mason was involved, She could manipulate the situation in her favor, but Mason had changed. He was now firmly by my side. I took a deep breath, my frustration building, and continued, "Just so you know, neither Mason nor I have any intention of living with you two. From now on, please stay out of our lives." "What are you saying? Your opinion doesn't matter. It's up to Mason to decide. At least tell me where the new house is," she demanded, her voice growing shrill. "How are you going to get here without even knowing the address?" I retorted. "This house is in my name, and I have the right to decide who lives here. If you barge in, it's trespassing." My mother-in-law was taken aback by my assertiveness, and the silence that followed spoke volumes. It was clear that the dynamics had shifted. Mason and I were taking control of our lives. "And I'll sue you if you trespass," I added, my voice steady and resolute. Her response was incredulous. "Trespassing? How rude to say that about your husband's family." At that, Mason intervened, his tone sharper than I had ever heard before. "Family? The family member I respected, my father, is gone. What remains now doesn't resemble the family I once knew." "What are you saying?" my mother-in-law faltered, her voice shaking with disbelief. "After that last phone call, I've had enough. Just sharing blood with you is embarrassing. From now on, my family is Dave and Nancy," Mason declared firmly. "I no longer consider you two part of my family." "Wait, Mason, don't say such things," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't bother us again, got it?" Mason said, and with that, he ended the call. Not waiting for her response, he quickly adjusted his phone settings to block her calls. I looked at him, concerned but supportive. "Hey, Mason, are you really okay with this?" "Yeah," he said, a genuine sense of freedom washing over his face. "I finally realized my mom was just using me. I feel completely relieved now." Mason was truly free from the manipulative ties that had bound him, and that was the turning point for us as a couple. We had successfully severed the unhealthy connections with his mother and her daughter. From that moment, Mason ceased all support. Without him, they struggled financially. My sister-in-law's part-time income wasn't enough, and my mother-in-law, long accustomed to being a housewife, had to find part-time work. Unaccustomed to the working world, she faced challenges and often met disapproval at her new job. Meanwhile, Mason and I enjoyed a peaceful life in our new home. There were no more unexpected visits from my mother-in-law. Our lives were stress-free, and for the first time in a long time, we truly felt at ease. I'm endlessly grateful to Mason for believing in me and for his courage in cutting ties with his toxic relatives. Whatever challenges may come our way in the future, I know Mason and I will support each other and navigate life together as a united team. After returning from a week-long overseas trip, I was taken aback by a call from my mother-in-law, Jessica, with palpable excitement in her voice. She told me that she had found $32,000. I was immediately confused, given that as a freelancer, I maintain only modest emergency savings and don't typically keep large sums of cash on hand. Plus, my banking card was safely in my possession, and no one should have been able to withdraw such a hefty amount without my knowledge. Jessica explained that she had taken the money from a drawer in our sideboard, assuming we were financially well off. While I appreciated her intentions, I was baffled as to why she thought she had permission to take such a large sum without asking. This left me with one pressing question: where had the $32,000 come from? The mystery lingered for a month, until Kevin, presumably her husband, came home. Although the situation was beginning to resolve, there were still unresolved questions. Over that month, Jessica had called me no less than 136 times. At first, I ignored them, not understanding why she was calling so frequently, but when I finally answered, she accused me of something I couldn't quite grasp. She seemed upset, but her reasons were unclear, and the accusatory tone only added to my confusion. As I tried to piece things together, the situation grew more complicated. I soon realized that Jessica wasn't just talking to me, she was also speaking to Lisa, a 33-year-old freelance jewelry designer, who had been sharing her ambitions and struggles. Lisa, who had always dreamed of having children, was finding it hard to balance her career with her desire to start a family. Meanwhile, her husband Kevin, also 33, had shifted gears in his career, leaving a steady job to become her business partner as Lisa's career grew. When Lisa and Kevin first married, they relied heavily on Kevin's income, as Lisa was just starting out, but by the time Lisa reached her 30s, her business had taken off, and she needed help managing the demands of her growing career. Kevin left his stable job to help her with the business, which flourished with his support. securing contracts with renowned international brands. Yet despite their success, they faced ongoing challenges, particularly with Kevin's mother, Jessica. Living alone in the family home, Jessica had a distorted view of their lifestyle, imagining that they lived in luxury, constantly attending extravagant parties and dinners with corporate elites. While these events were part of Lisa's professional responsibilities as a jewelry designer, Jessica believed they were just lavish social indulgences. This misconception bled into her financial expectations as well. She often asked Lisa and Kevin for money to host her own social gatherings, assuming their perceived wealth could easily cover her desires. Despite being financially capable of supporting Jessica, Lisa and Kevin's lifestyle wasn't as glamorous as Jessica imagined. The events they attended were necessary for their business image, and maintaining this image required significant expenses, like dressing elegantly and dining at upscale restaurants. But Jessica frequently expressed envy toward their lifestyle, often with a sarcastic undertone, and she didn't shy away from making requests for financial help. While Lisa consistently declined these requests, Kevin, seeing his mother's constant demands, occasionally gave in, hoping to maintain peace and avoid disruptions to their work. Unfortunately, this only seemed to fuel Jessica's expectations, leading to even more frequent and unreasonable demands. A recent visit from Jessica added more tension to the situation. She insisted that Kevin buy her an extravagant new dress for an upcoming social event, even though we suggested a more affordable option, like a simple three-piece suit. But Jessica was insistent on the lavish dress, claiming that it was essential for the occasion's grandeur. She even demanded a matching handbag, expecting us to cover that expense as well. To handle her financial demands more efficiently, Kevin set up a credit card in Jessica's name, instructing her to use it for her expenses. Initially, this seemed like a reasonable solution. Jessica's spending got out of hand, and Kevin had to step in to rein her in. He set a new rule: she would need to consult him before making any significant purchases. The intention was to give her some independence while keeping her spending in check, finding a balance between her desires and our need to manage finances responsibly. Despite the new restriction, Jessica's habits didn't change much. She went ahead and bought an expensive ring without consulting us first, and the costs quickly began to pile up, putting a strain on our finances. Kevin, who was handling the bills, soon realized the situation had become unsustainable. Frustrated by Jessica's disregard for the financial consequences, he imposed a spending cap on her credit card. When Jessica found out she couldn't pay for her latest shopping spree because of the new limit, she was furious. She stormed into our house, questioning the fairness of the restriction. She argued that her enjoyment of luxury was no different from our professional need to dress up for glamorous events. We tried to explain that the events we attended, product launches and parties, were essential to our work, often hosted in lavish settings, but Jessica only saw it as indulgence on our part, not understanding the professional obligations that came with these appearances. After the spending cap was introduced, Jessica's complaints quieted down a bit, though she still voiced her discontent to Kevin from time to time. Life settled into a more manageable routine, and as the year came to a close, an exciting opportunity presented itself. A foreign brand offered us the chance to expand internationally, and this proposal thrilled me. It felt like a step toward joining the ranks of top-tier designers. Kevin, who was overseeing the business side of things, also recognized the importance of the opportunity and was eager to seize it. However, despite the excitement, Kevin and I had concerns about how Jessica would react, given her history of excessive spending. When we shared the news of the potential overseas expansion, her response was exactly what we expected. Jessica accused us of planning to live luxuriously abroad under the guise of work, fearing that we were preparing to relocate permanently. To ease her anxiety, I reassured her that we would return once our business affairs were settled overseas, but her unease didn't subside. She seemed more worried about being left behind. The constant debates drained both Kevin and me. We knew we couldn't take her with us, but we still wanted to offer some consolation. Tired of the ongoing arguments, Kevin suggested a compromise. He would send her on a week-long vacation. Jessica, half pleased and half skeptical, accepted the offer, and Kevin agreed to cover her flight and hotel costs, hoping it would bring some peace. Unfortunately, the tranquility was short-lived. A few days later, while Kevin was focused on the overseas arrangements, Jessica showed up at our house with yet another request. She wanted extra money for shopping during her trip abroad. When I asked about the credit card Kevin had given her, she admitted he had taken it back, fearing she might misuse it due to fluctuating currency rates. I told Jessica that I couldn't authorize any financial assistance without Kevin's consent, and the conversation ended with her storming out in frustration. As the new year arrived, Jessica set off on her 10-day trip. When she returned, she shared a surprising revelation that would completely change our understanding of the situation. Jessica called me, excited about her trip, but soon admitted that she had overspent on souvenirs. Growing increasingly frustrated, I confronted her about the money she claimed I had set aside for her, a sum I had no memory of earmarking. The conversation quickly took a sharp turn. I knew I had savings in my account set aside for business emergencies, but there was no way Jessica could have accessed it without my approval. That's when she casually told me she had found $332,000 in a drawer in the sideboard of our house. I was stunned. Keeping such a large sum of cash at home was unthinkable for us. I told Jessica that if she had indeed taken money without permission, it was theft. No matter that she was family, I emphasized the seriousness of the situation, especially if Kevin had planned to use that money for a business deal. During her trip, there had been no disruptions to our business transactions, which made her claim even more suspicious. Jessica, seemingly unfazed, admitted to using the money, as if simply telling me would make it all okay. I pointed out that taking money without permission was not only unethical, but also illegal. She defended herself by saying that, since we lived so extravagantly, she didn't see any harm in sharing a bit of that lifestyle, suggesting it was like doing a favor for a parent. Her rationale only deepened my concerns about her understanding of boundaries and responsibility. I found her reasoning completely inappropriate. She had taken money without asking, yet showed no remorse or recognition of the seriousness of her actions. She promised that I would talk to Kevin when he returned, confident that he, as her son, would understand. She even nonchalantly remarked that $32,000 wasn't much to him. Though I agreed to pass her message along, I was deeply unsettled by the entire ordeal and her complete lack of awareness. Ending the call, she casually thanked me and asked me to send her regards to Kevin. When Kevin returned that night, still confused about the $32,000 in cash, I confronted him. He explained that he had withdrawn the money 12 days prior for an urgent payment that required cash. I was surprised he had kept such a large sum in a drawer. Given the security risks involved, Kevin seemed troubled as he asked if I knew anything about the cash. That was when I realized the money was indeed his, but we still didn't understand why it was kept in our house or what its intended purpose was. I questioned Kevin further, trying to piece together the mystery. I was perplexed as to why Kevin had left such a large sum of money at home, especially since we usually conducted transactions through bank transfers. Kevin then revealed that, after limiting Jessica's credit card, she had secretly borrowed money from other sources, consumer finance cards and credit cards she had opened without his knowledge. When Kevin discovered this, it added a whole new layer of complexity to our already strained relationship with her. To address her escalating debts, Kevin took decisive action. He collected all of Jessica's credit cards and withdrew cash to pay off her obligations. Despite giving her the money, Kevin was aware of the risk that she might squander it carelessly. This decision shed some light on the situation, though it still didn't explain Jessica's motives. I was inclined to handle the debt repayment directly through bank transfers, thinking this would be more straightforward and traceable. However, Kevin preferred to avoid leaving too many records in our bank accounts to maintain trust with our business partners and keep our bookkeeping clean. So, he chose to withdraw the money and manage the payments personally. Supporting Jessica's overseas trip, though, was more of a parting gesture, acknowledging that once we moved abroad, we wouldn't be as available to her as before. 3. As time passed, Jessica began calling me frequently, up to 136 times a day. Kevin advised me not to engage with her excessive attempts to contact us, but her persistence made me uneasy. One day, I finally picked up, and her voice, tinged with desperation, broke through. She apologized for the constant calls, revealing that she was facing daily demands for payment and that Kevin wasn't responding to her. She turned to me as her last resort for help. I was shocked that Kevin would take such a drastic measure against his own mother, especially if he had set aside money to clear her debts. Had he used it as intended, perhaps Jessica wouldn't be overwhelmed by the calls and letters from collection agencies. Now, she was being bombarded with notices, unable to resolve her mounting financial problems. The situation was starting to look like something out of a drama series. When Jessica called again, pleading for help, claiming it was a son's duty to assist his mother, I felt the weight of her distress. I mentioned her plea to Kevin when he came home, but his response was unexpectedly harsh. he coldly dismissed her, pointing out that she had squandered her chances to resolve things herself. Despite my desire to help, I decided to block Jessica's number. She was Kevin's mother, and if he had chosen to distance himself, I had little choice but to respect that. As the day of our overseas move grew closer, I found myself surrounded by boxes in our cluttered home, a profound sense of helplessness settling over me regarding Jessica's situation. It soon became clear that things had escalated far beyond what I had imagined. Jessica had to sell her house to settle her debts, a drastic measure that highlighted the severity of her financial troubles. In addition to the $32,000 Kevin had set aside to help her, she had concealed even more debt. The total amount was so vast that even after selling her property, she couldn't fully pay off her obligations. The revelation that her house had to be sold was a painful reminder of just how deep Jessica's troubles ran. Despite all of this, a significant balance remained outstanding, emphasizing the harsh realities of financial mismanagement and its devastating consequences for personal and family life. Kevin, though saddened, realized there was little we could do to prevent the loss of his childhood home. The emotional toll of losing such a personal place, due to his mother's actions, was undoubtedly heavy. Now, Jessica was living in a modest apartment, struggling to manage her remaining debts with a part-time job. Finding work at her age was challenging, and while I felt some sympathy for her, the reality was that her financial mismanagement had led to this situation. It was a stark reminder that, even later in life, taking responsibility for one's actions is crucial. Meanwhile, our business was thriving overseas, opening doors to opportunities one hadn't anticipated. Back home, we began receiving inquiries from various brands, and I found myself navigating offers from unexpected places. This new development significantly broadened our professional horizons. While this success was gratifying, it came with its challenges. My schedule was so packed that finding time to rest was difficult, and Kevin, equally busy with his own responsibilities, was no less stretched. Amid this bustling new life, the idea of starting a family felt like a distant dream. As I gazed out at the foreign cityscape from my window, I reflected on the stark contrast between our thriving new environment and the struggles we had left behind. It underscored the complexities of life, where professional success often coexists with personal challenges and difficult family decisions.
On the morning of the 25th, the president unexpectedly informed me that I was terminated. He explained that his daughter would be taking over my position, and therefore he required my immediate resignation. I stood there, stunned, unable to respond. That particular day was crucial for handling payments to our suppliers, some of which were longtime partners whose transactions I oversaw personally as a gesture of goodwill. Despite this, he suggested I take the day off as a parting gift and quickly ushered me out, the office door snapping shut behind me. My name is Donna, and I've been with this family-owned paving company since high school, working as a clerical assistant for over a decade. The company, with a staff of around 32, had always felt like a warm, welcoming place under the leadership of the founder, who was both president and an active part of our daily operations. His wife, Brenda, often helped with various tasks, and their daughter, Carol, was skilled in both field and office work. Her husband, a well-respected site manager, earned the loyalty of the on-site teams. Despite being the founding family, they treated everyone equally, fostering a harmonious work environment. This atmosphere shifted dramatically when the founder stepped down after a cancer diagnosis, passing the presidency to Carol's husband with everyone's support as we all wished the founder well in his health battles. But an unexpected twist came when the founder's estranged son, Anthony, resurfaced after 33 years of silence. Disowned decades ago, he returned with his family, and the company's dynamic changed almost overnight, marked by my abrupt and disheartening dismissal after years of loyalty. I hadn't known about Anthony's past until his sudden reappearance. Longtime employees shared stories of his troubled youth, recounting his frequent run-ins with the law and multiple instances where his parents had to smooth things over. His issues escalated as he dropped out of high school and became involved in multi-level marketing schemes and fraud, which eventually led his father to disown him. After years of estrangement, Anthony had returned, claiming to have recognized his mistakes and pleading for forgiveness. This tense reunion unfolded in our compact office layout with little space separating the clerical area from the president's office. He expressed his desire to start anew and work for the company, but given his past, it was hard to take his intentions seriously. Nevertheless, the chairman requested that we all give Anthony a chance, asking for a fresh start. Carol and the other senior employees, aware of Anthony's checkered history, struggled to embrace his return but respected the chairman's wishes. Soon after, Anthony and his family moved into an annex of the chairman's house, with Anthony joining the company and his wife helping with household responsibilities. I only saw their daughter once during a brief visit to the office. She looked like a college student. The chairman was convinced that Anthony had genuinely changed after enduring hardships, and Brenda was thrilled to have her son back, hoping it would restore unity within both the family and the company. But this optimism faded quickly. Before long, Anthony began stirring up tension, insisting that, as the eldest son, he was the rightful heir to the presidency. This bold claim soured his relationships with Carol and her husband, the site manager. Despite putting on a diligent front around his father, Anthony contributed little real work and frequently belittled the value of physical labor and those who performed it. His dismissive attitude toward the staff, whom he referred to as mere worker ants, swiftly alienated him. Several younger employees were so demoralized by his behavior that they felt compelled to approach the chairman directly, explaining they could not work under such conditions. Despite these concerns, the chairman and Brenda tried to mediate, urging patience and a broader view of the situation. Meanwhile, the chairman's health deteriorated, possibly from stress, leading to his hospitalization 5 months ago. During this vulnerable period, Anthony unilaterally declared himself president, ignoring the staff's preference for the original succession plan, which designated Carol's husband as the successor. Swayed by parental affection or perhaps clouded judgment, the chairman allowed this change, creating a deep rift within the company. Many employees saw this decision as biased and damaging to the company's previously positive atmosphere. With morale plummeting, Carol and her husband quietly took on the burden of keeping the company afloat. This shift in responsibility meant that many administrative tasks, once shared by Brenda, Carol, and me, fell entirely on my shoulders. I often found myself working late into the night to keep up. Meanwhile, Anthony's commitment was minimal. He spent much of his time at hostess bars, betting on horse races, and gambling. Our interactions grew particularly tense after I confronted him about misusing the company credit card for personal expenses. While I had overlooked a few questionable charges in the past, this incident was impossible to ignore. Returning the receipt to him, I said firmly, "I can't approve this expense." Anthony's response was sharp. "Why not?" I replied, "This is for your wife's corrective underwear. It's not a business expense." Anthony's face flushed with anger. "Don't challenge me. She's the president's wife. It's only natural for her to dress well. This is a valid expense." The exchange left a bitter edge to our already strained working relationship, as Anthony's disregard for boundaries and resources became more evident by the day. I was stunned by his reasoning. The expense was $8,000. A substantial amount by any standard, but his next suggestion left me speechless. "Then let's make selling corrective underwear our new business venture. We'll categorize it as inventory so it counts as an expense." He looked genuinely pleased with this idea. "We're a paving company," I managed to say. Undeterred, he continued, "So what? We'll tell clients that if they don't buy from us, we'll cancel their contracts. Everyone will buy. It's easy money. $38,000 for a set." He laughed at his own idea, but I was horrified. "That's absolutely unacceptable," I responded sharply. "It would ruin our credibility." From that moment on, I became the target of his disdain. Daily, he belittled me, and the situation became so unbearable that I often thought about quitting. But my loyalty to the chairman, who had always supported me, and my concern for my colleagues, who would undoubtedly face more hardship if I left, kept me from doing so. Besides, I couldn't afford to lose my income suddenly. I resolved to endure it, biding my time and planning to leave when I could do so responsibly. Then, unexpectedly, I was fired. As I processed this abrupt turn, I knew my sudden departure would create issues for our clients. With determination, I approached him. "I can't just leave without proper notice and a handover," I insisted. "Your daughter will struggle with the workload on her own, especially today with her supplier payments due." His face turned red with anger. "Shut up. I told you to resign because my daughter is starting today. But the payments wait until the suppliers come to collect. There's no need to pay them up front." Shocked, I tried to reason with him. "Isn't it normal to pay for something once you buy it?" I explained, as though speaking to a child. He dismissed me with a shocking suggestion. "Then tell them we won't make the payment this time. They should give it to us for free." That's not how business is done, I replied, astounded. You're completely useless, he snapped. My daughter has a college degree, she can handle the office work easily. Unlike you, she won't question my expenses. We don't need someone like you in our company. Leave, now. It became clear he wanted his daughter to take over accounting to justify personal expenses as business expenditures. Fine, I said, but don't think I'll regret this. With a heavy heart, I gathered my belongings and left. Concerned for our clients, I immediately called Carol, knowing she and Brenda were preoccupied with the chairman's health, but trusting her to handle the urgent situation. Once outside, I realized I'd been fired without notice, a clear violation of labor standards. If I reported this, the company would face serious repercussions. Since our company was part of a payment support system for small and medium-sized enterprises, I could claim my severance pay and 1 month's salary. There was no need to rush into another job. I walked away with my integrity intact, hopeful that Carol could manage the chaos left behind. Since I could apply for my benefits within 5 years of retirement and the Labor Standards Office had a 3-year statute of limitations, I meticulously mapped out the steps and timeline for my retirement. This plan gave me some much-needed breathing room. I'd been working tirelessly with endless overtime and weekends without a moment to myself. Eager for a change, I decided to take a day trip to the beach to recharge. After a refreshing day by the sea, I checked my phone in my locker only to find it flooded with missed calls, emails, and voicemails. Among these, an email from Carol stood out. She confirmed that the payment processes had been handled smoothly, and everything was in order, a relief given the tense way I had left the company. Then I listened to a voicemail from the company, hearing the president's panicked voice. What's going on? They're saying I'm not the real president. Did you know about this? Explain yourself. I couldn't help but chuckle at his distress and delayed realization of his situation. One message in particular caught my attention, a request from the chairman himself. Feeling a sense of urgency, I headed to the hospital that evening. When I arrived, I found Brenda and the president, Anthony, already there in the chairman's room. The chairman, seeing me, apologized from his hospital bed, saying, "Donna, I'm truly sorry for my son's foolishness." Anthony, still arrogant and bewildered, blurted out, "What's going on? I'm not the official president. Explain yourself." His confusion was evident, but the chairman quickly silenced him with a firm command to quiet down. It turned out that after I had called Carol, she had immediately informed both the chairman and Brenda of the situation. The chairman had then confronted Anthony with a pointed question. "Do you really not understand?" This revelation was a turning point, bringing clarity to the mess created in the wake of my dismissal. Anthony, visibly agitated and confused, continued to raise his voice. I calmly explained the reality of his position. "Anthony, you never actually had any legal authority. Your role as president was essentially a nominal title." I continued, clarifying, in business terms, president is a role within the company but does not automatically carry legal standing. The representative director is the one who holds legal responsibilities for the company's external actions. This role requires specific legal procedures to change, unlike the more informal assignment of a company title. 5 months ago, when Anthony was named president, there had been significant opposition from Carol, the site manager, and veteran employees. To keep things running smoothly, I had suggested a compromise. Anthony would act as a figurehead president, while the chairman retained his legal status as the representative director. With a growing understanding of these distinctions, it was clear that the chairman's trust had been in my knowledge of the company's operations and legal requirements. I understood the implications clearly. The plan was straightforward. If Anthony showed true commitment and earned the trust of the employees, we would start the formal process to make his presidency official. However, if he failed to prove himself as a capable leader, our contingency plan involved either removing him or possibly closing the company altogether, allowing Carol and the site manager to start a new venture. While people like Carol had their doubts, the chairman and Brenda held on to hope for Anthony, that is, until he unjustly dismissed me. This finally opened their eyes to his unsuitability for leadership. "If you want to lead, you need to respect and support your employees," the chairman had often reminded Anthony. But Anthony, in his usual dismissive way, brushed it off. "It's not a big deal, right? Can't we just take care of the formalities now?" "No, it's not that simple," the chairman explained patiently. "Our company offers stocks to employees who wish to invest, and many have done so. Donna, for example, owns 15% of the company, making her a major shareholder. We can't just ignore her position. This exchange underscored Anthony's fundamental misunderstanding of the responsibilities and ethics of leadership. His face turned pale as he began to grasp the seriousness of his role. "I don't own any shares," he stammered, clearly shaken. With a sigh, the chairman replied, "I intended to pass my shares to you once you prove yourself worthy as president. I'm disappointed. Were you only interested in the wealth, thinking I had little time left?" The chairman's voice trailed off, filled with despair, and he sank back, emotionally drained. Brenda, standing by him, remained silent, visibly troubled by the situation. Defiantly, Anthony muttered, "I'm the eldest son. What's wrong with claiming what's rightfully mine? The company belongs to me." His words only deepened the chairman's disappointment. "I can't allow this to continue," the chairman declared firmly. "As the representative director and a shareholder, I hold the authority to call a shareholders' meeting to discuss your removal. I seize the moment to speak. Mr. President, I no longer wish to work under your leadership. I'm resigning effective immediately. However, I expect my severance, 1 month's salary, and payment for all unpaid overtime and holiday work." I added, "As a shareholder, I'll also pursue action through the Labor Standards Office to remove those harming the company." As I spoke, Anthony's expression shifted from shock to pure dread. I continued, "Carol has been visiting clients and informing them about our new company, and many have already decided to switch over. Most of our employees are planning to join us as well." "That's impossible. I'll sue you," Anthony shouted, his voice breaking. But his threats were empty, as the decisive actions we'd taken had already set the stage for a significant shift. The chairman, standing his ground, asserted, "I am the representative director. You don't have the authority to make such decisions." Anthony collapsed, a picture of defeat. Watching him, I felt a mix of regret, disappointment, and a sense of closure. "Mr. President," I said, addressing him with finality, "it's unfortunate it had to end this way. If you had only tried to learn and adapt, things might have been different. But this is the result of your choices." In the aftermath, the chairman made the difficult decision to close the company, leaving Anthony without a position. Anthony's wife attempted to sell corrective undergarments, but the venture failed. They eventually faced legal trouble for their involvement in a pyramid scheme and were arrested. Carol, returning home, found boxes of unsold inventory, a sad reminder of their failed attempt. Meanwhile, their daughter found work elsewhere, though I don't know the details. I am now happily employed at the new company Carol and the site manager established. Here, I value my relationships with colleagues and the genuine supportive work environment we've created. This experience taught me the importance of ethical leadership and the invaluable strength of a workplace built on integrity and respect.